Long before cities filled the horizon with towers and noise, before engines rolled across roads, before bright electric windows glowed through the night, there were only small settlements resting quietly beside water and earth. In those distant centuries, people lived close to the ground itself. Their hands touched soil every day. Their feet crossed muddy paths worn smooth by generations. They understood the changing moods of rivers, the softness of clay after rain, the way wind moved differently across dry land and wet land. And somewhere, very early in human history, someone discovered that the earth beneath their feet could become something stronger. Not quickly. Not perfectly. But slowly. Very slowly. At first, it may have happened almost by accident. A patch of mud left beneath strong sunlight hardened more than expected. The edges became firm. The shape held together even after days passed. People noticed small things like this because life moved carefully then. There were no loud distractions pulling attention away from ordinary details. A person carrying water may have stepped across hardened clay near a riverbank and felt the difference beneath their feet. Another person may have seen cracked pieces of dried mud surviving beneath the hot sun while softer ground around them washed away after rain. The discovery did not arrive with celebration. It arrived quietly. Like most ancient knowledge, the first people who shaped earth into simple blocks probably never imagined how important those blocks would become. They were only trying to make life a little easier, a little warmer, a little safer from rain and wind. The earliest homes in many river valleys were built from reeds, branches, packed mud, and grass roofs. These homes could be comfortable for a time, especially in warm climates, but heavy storms damaged them easily. Strong wind opened cracks in the walls. Floodwater softened foundations. Every season demanded repairs. So people experimented. Small handfuls of wet clay were pressed together. Mud was shaped into rough forms beneath the sun. The blocks dried slowly in open air. They became harder day by day until they could be stacked. Simple walls appeared first. Low walls. Crooked walls. Uneven walls shaped by inexperienced hands. But they stood. And that mattered. In ancient river valleys, especially in places where large forests or natural stone were difficult to find, the earth itself became the most valuable building material. Clay rested everywhere beneath the surface. Rich soil gathered along rivers after seasonal floods. Wet mud clung to feet and tools. People realized they were standing on endless building material. They only needed patience. In Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, entire communities slowly learned to work with mud bricks. The land there was wide and open. Summers could feel endlessly hot. The rivers flooded and left thick layers of fertile earth behind. The smell of wet clay mixed with river reeds filled the air during certain seasons. Workers gathered near muddy banks early in the morning before the strongest heat arrived. They carried woven baskets, wooden tools, and clay-stained ropes. Some wore simple linen clothing darkened by sweat and soil. The work began quietly. Shovels pressed into heavy ground. Mud slapped into baskets. Water splashed softly into mixing pits. Birds drifted overhead while sunlight slowly spread across the river. Children often watched nearby. Sometimes they helped carry water or gathered loose straw from fields. Older workers taught younger ones without formal lessons. Knowledge passed through repetition. Watch the clay. Feel the texture. Add more water. Not too much. Press harder. Wait longer. Everything about brickmaking required observation. The workers learned the behavior of earth the way sailors learn the behavior of waves. Some clay cracked too easily. Some clay shrank while drying. Some clay held together beautifully beneath sunlight. The best brickmakers became respected not because they worked quickly, but because they understood patience. And patience was everywhere in the process. The clay first had to be dug from the earth. In some places, pits grew deeper over many years until they resembled shallow ponds during rainy seasons. Workers stood knee-deep in wet ground, lifting heavy loads into carts or baskets. The clay felt cool in the morning. Smooth in some areas. Gritty in others. When squeezed between fingers, good clay held its shape without falling apart. That was important. Very important. After gathering enough clay, workers carried it toward open workyards beside villages or city edges. These yards were not clean factory spaces like modern industrial grounds. They were living places filled with movement, dust, smoke, voices, animals, and weather. Dogs wandered between piles of earth. Donkeys pulled carts slowly across uneven ground. Women carried baskets of food beneath cloth coverings. Smoke from cooking fires drifted across the yards during midday. The entire process existed inside ordinary life. And then came the mixing. The mixing could last for hours. Sometimes entire days. Large pits held wet clay while workers stepped directly into the mud. Bare feet pressed downward repeatedly. Legs became coated in thick brown earth. The workers moved slowly in circles, crushing lumps and spreading moisture evenly through the clay. The sound was soft, heavy, rhythmic. Wet mud shifting beneath human weight. Sometimes straw was added during this stage. Chopped straw helped hold the bricks together and reduced cracking while drying. Workers scattered golden pieces of dry plant material into dark mud until the mixture became thick and fibrous. The smell changed too. Earth, grass, water, sweat, smoke from distant fires. All blending beneath the warm air. The work could feel strangely peaceful despite its difficulty. There was rhythm in repetition. Workers did not rush because rushing damaged the clay. Good bricks demanded steady movement. Nearby, older brickmakers often watched carefully. They could judge the quality of clay with astonishing accuracy. A single touch told them whether more water was needed. A glance revealed whether the mixture rested too dry beneath the sun. Their knowledge lived entirely inside memory and experience. No books. No diagrams. Only years of watching mud slowly become walls. As the day continued, sunlight climbed higher above the workyards. Heat shimmered above the ground. Workers wiped sweat from their foreheads using rough cloth or dusty hands. Still the work continued. Because bricks were always needed. Homes needed repair. Granaries needed walls. Temples expanded. City gates grew taller. Every growing settlement demanded more bricks than the season before. And every brick still began with the same quiet materials. Earth. Water. Hands. Time. Once the clay reached the proper consistency, the shaping could begin. This stage required wooden molds. The molds were simple but deeply important. Most were built by local carpenters using sturdy wood worn smooth over years of use. Some molds created one brick at a time. Others shaped 2 or 4 together. Before clay entered the molds, workers often dusted the inside lightly with sand or water so the wet mixture would release more easily afterward. Then came a motion repeated countless millions of times across human history. A worker grabbed a heavy lump of clay, lifted it carefully, and threw it firmly into the mold. The clay landed with a thick sound. A dull wet thump. Extra clay spilled over the edges. A flat wooden tool scraped across the top, removing the excess and smoothing the surface. The workers' hands moved quickly from long practice, yet nothing appeared hurried. Each movement had rhythm. Each action carried memory. Then the mold lifted slowly away. And beneath it rested a fresh brick. Soft. Perfectly still. Fragile as wet bread dough. The new brick could not yet support weight. Even careless handling could damage its corners. So workers placed each fresh brick gently onto drying ground beneath open sky. Rows began to form. Long rows. Endless rows stretching across dusty fields. From a distance, the drying yards looked almost beautiful in the afternoon light. Thousands of soft earth-colored rectangles rested quietly beneath the sun like sleeping shapes warming themselves after rain. The smell rising from the fields was unforgettable. Warm clay. Drying grass. Dust. And sunlight itself heating the earth. Workers walked carefully between the rows to avoid stepping on soft bricks. Some carried water. Some adjusted damaged edges. Others turned partially dried bricks onto different sides so they hardened evenly. Nothing could be rushed. If the outer surface dried too quickly while the inside remained wet, cracks appeared. If rain arrived unexpectedly, entire batches could soften and collapse. So brickmakers watched the sky constantly. Weather controlled their lives. A dark cloud on the horizon could change everything. During dry seasons, the workers sometimes relaxed slightly while the bricks baked slowly beneath steady sunlight. Meals were eaten beside shade structures made from cloth or reeds. Bread, onions, olives, beans, and thin soups were common foods in many regions. The workers rested their tired legs while warm wind crossed the fields. Conversations remained quiet. Simple. Ordinary. Talk about weather. Animals. Harvests. Family members. The same kinds of conversations humans have always shared after long work. And surrounding all of it was the endless presence of bricks. Bricks drying. Bricks hardening. Bricks waiting. As evening approached, shadows stretched across the yards. The air cooled slightly. Birds settled near river reeds while smoke rose from distant homes preparing supper. The fresh bricks remained outside through the night. Moonlight sometimes touched their surfaces softly. Dew gathered lightly before dawn. And then morning returned. Another slow day beside the earth began again. This rhythm repeated not for weeks, but for centuries. Entire civilizations were quietly built this way. One brick at a time. As generations passed beside the rivers of the ancient world, people slowly became more skilled at shaping earth into lasting forms. The earliest bricks had been rough and uneven. Some cracked too easily. Some melted back into mud after heavy storms. But little by little, through patience and memory, brickmakers learned what worked and what failed. And human settlements began to change. Small villages grew into larger towns. Towns became crowded cities. And many of those cities rose from nothing more than baked earth beneath human feet. In Mesopotamia, where the land stretched wide beneath pale skies and hot wind, brick became part of everyday existence. Stone was rare in many places there. Large forests were limited. But clay rested almost everywhere near the rivers. So people used what the earth gave them. The cities that slowly appeared across the region often glowed softly beneath the sun with shades of brown, red, gold, and dusty orange. Walls surrounded neighborhoods. Flat-roofed homes stood closely together. Narrow streets twisted between markets, workshops, storage rooms, ovens, and sleeping spaces. And beneath nearly every structure rested handmade bricks. Workers woke before sunrise each morning while darkness still lingered over the riverbanks. The air at that hour felt cooler and softer. Sometimes thin mist drifted low above the water. Dogs barked somewhere far away. A few early fires already burned inside cooking areas where bread dough baked slowly against heated stone. The brickmakers walked quietly toward the clay pits carrying simple tools. Wooden shovels, woven baskets, clay-stained ropes. The ground felt damp beneath their sandals. In the distance, the city slowly awakened. Merchants prepared stalls. Water carriers balanced heavy jars across their shoulders. Animals stirred behind fences and wooden gates. But near the clay pits, life moved differently. More slowly. More quietly. The workers stepped into the earth itself and began another day of gathering mud from the riverbanks. Their hands disappeared into cool wet clay. The smell rising from the ground mixed with the smell of reeds and standing water. Everything felt connected to the river. The river fed the crops. The crops fed the people. And the river's mud built the homes where those people slept. Seasonal flooding played an enormous role in this ancient cycle. Each year, floodwaters spread fresh layers of rich sediment across the land. When the waters slowly retreated, soft clay remained behind. Brickmakers understood this rhythm deeply. They waited for the right conditions. Too much water made the clay weak. Too little moisture made it difficult to shape. So the workers studied the earth carefully, often without speaking very much at all. Experience taught them more than written instructions ever could. Older brickmakers became almost like quiet guardians of practical knowledge. Younger workers watched their movements carefully. How they squeezed the clay. How they tested moisture. How they judged drying weather simply by looking at the sky. Some of these older craftsmen had spent 40 or 50 years beside the same clay pits. Their hands had shaped tens of thousands of bricks. Their fingernails permanently held traces of earth. Their backs bent slightly from long labor. Yet their movements remained calm and practiced. There was dignity in repetition. The mixing pits beside the cities often grew large from constant use. Workers carried fresh clay there by basket and cart. Water was poured slowly into the pits while groups of laborers stepped directly into the mud to blend everything evenly. The mud pressed heavily around their ankles. Sometimes around their calves. Their legs moved slowly through the thick earth while straw mixed into the clay little by little. The sound never disappeared. Soft squishing mud. Water splashing lightly. Workers breathing steadily beneath morning heat. Nearby, children sometimes played at the edges of the workyards, shaping tiny pretend bricks with their own small hands. They copied the adults naturally because brickmaking surrounded their lives from childhood onward. A child born near a brickyard grew up understanding the smell of wet earth as something ordinary. Comforting even. The smell meant work. Shelter. Warmth. Food cooking somewhere nearby. It meant home. As cities expanded, demand for bricks became enormous. Temples required vast numbers of them. Defensive walls needed constant repairs. Wealthy families built larger homes with storage rooms, courtyards, and upper floors. Entire teams of workers focused only on shaping bricks all day long. The molds moved steadily from hand to hand. Lift. Throw. Press. Scrape. Lift again. The process repeated endlessly beneath the sun. And despite the enormous amount of labor involved, there was still a strange calmness to the work. Much of brickmaking involved waiting patiently for natural forces to do their part. The sun dried the bricks. The wind hardened the surfaces. Time strengthened the shape. Human beings guided the process, but nature remained deeply involved in every stage. This made brickmaking feel less like forcing the earth into obedience and more like cooperating with it. Some bricks were only sun-dried. These worked well in dry climates where heavy rain rarely fell. Thick mud brick walls kept homes surprisingly cool during brutal summer heat. Inside these homes, the air often felt calmer and softer than the burning streets outside. The walls absorbed heat slowly. Rooms remained dim and peaceful during midday. Families rested there during the hottest hours while sunlight blazed across rooftops. The home smelled faintly of clay dust, woven mats, smoke, grain, and cooking oil. At night, cooler air drifted through small windows while distant voices echoed softly through narrow streets. Many generations lived entire lives surrounded by handmade brick walls. Some homes passed from parents to children for decades. Repairs happened gradually. Damaged bricks were replaced by new ones from nearby yards. Nothing was wasted if it could still serve some purpose. Broken bricks sometimes became pathways. Fragments reinforced walls. Dust returned to the earth. Life moved in circles. In larger cities, monumental structures began rising slowly from these same humble materials. Temple platforms climbed upward layer by layer. Palace walls stretched across broad areas. Storehouses protected grain supplies essential for survival. Thousands upon thousands of bricks were required. And still, every single one began as wet earth shaped by human hands. The scale of labor became almost unimaginable. Long lines of workers carried baskets beneath the sun while supervisors counted supplies nearby. Scribes pressed symbols into clay tablets recording deliveries and work assignments. Donkeys hauled loads along dusty roads. Water carriers moved constantly between wells, rivers, and work yards. Yet even inside busy cities, the process remained ancient and slow. Nothing truly rushed. The bricks themselves refused haste. If workers tried drying them too quickly, cracks appeared. If firing temperatures changed too suddenly, entire stacks could fail. Patience remained more valuable than speed. And so the cities rose carefully over many years. Sometimes over many generations. A child might watch workers building a massive wall and later grow old while repairs still continued on the same structure. This gradual pace shaped human thinking differently from the fast-moving modern world. Buildings were expected to weather, settle, crack, and be repaired. Nothing felt instantly complete. Everything evolved slowly through time. The great cities of ancient Mesopotamia eventually became places of astonishing complexity. Markets filled with cloth, grain, spices, pottery, tools, and animals. Priests walked through temple courtyards. Bakers prepared flatbread before sunrise. Musicians played soft instruments during festivals and evening gatherings. And beneath all of it rested brick. Endless layers of handmade brick. Even roads and drainage systems depended on the patient labor of brickmakers. When rain fell, water flowed between brick-lined channels. When ovens burned, brick walls held the heat. When families slept, brick homes sheltered them from wind and dust. The ordinary brick quietly supported daily existence in ways most people rarely noticed. Perhaps that is why brickmakers themselves were often overlooked despite their importance. Kings received praise. Generals became famous. Priests were remembered. But the workers who shaped the cities with mud-covered hands usually disappeared into history without names. Still, their labor remained everywhere. Inside walls. Beneath streets. Around courtyards. Under the feet of future generations. As centuries continued, brickmaking knowledge spread outward from river civilizations into many other regions. Different climates created different techniques. Different cultures adjusted recipes and methods according to local conditions. But the heart of the process stayed remarkably similar. Gather the earth. Mix carefully. Shape slowly. Dry patiently. Fire steadily. Wait quietly. Again and again. Always again. And somewhere beneath the evening sky, beside another river in another ancient land, workers continued pressing wet clay into wooden molds while smoke drifted softly upward through the cooling air. For a long time in human history, many bricks were hardened only by the sun. The sunlight itself became part of the building process. Day after day, warm air slowly pulled moisture from the clay while dry wind passed gently over the open fields. In hot regions, this method worked well enough for ordinary homes, storage buildings, walls, and workshops. But sun-dried bricks had limits. Heavy rain weakened them. Floodwater damaged them. Strong storms slowly wore them away. And so, little by little, people discovered another transformation hidden inside the earth. Fire. Not sudden destructive fire racing through forests or villages. But controlled fire. Patient fire. The kind of fire watched carefully through long nights by tired workers sitting beside glowing kilns beneath the stars. The discovery that clay could become far stronger after intense heating changed brickmaking forever. The earth itself transformed during firing. Soft mud hardened into something much more durable. And yet, even this great discovery arrived slowly. Quietly. Like most ancient knowledge. No one truly knows who first noticed the effect clearly enough to repeat it again and again. Perhaps bricks resting too near a cooking fire hardened unexpectedly. Perhaps part of a collapsed mud structure baked beneath accidental flames and survived storms better afterward. However it happened, people learned that fire could strengthen earth in extraordinary ways. The earliest firing methods were simple. Very simple. Workers stacked dried bricks together in open areas with fuel placed between layers. Wood, reeds, dried grass, brush, and animal dung were all used depending on the region and available resources. Then the fires were lit. Smoke drifted upward slowly. Heat moved carefully through the stacks. The process required constant watching. Too little heat left the bricks weak. Too much heat cracked them or melted edges unevenly. And so the workers learned through observation. Always observation. The color of smoke mattered. The smell mattered. The sound of the fire mattered. Even the changing color of the bricks themselves became important signs. As generations passed, firing methods became more organized. Permanent kilns slowly appeared near growing towns and cities. Some were large round structures built from older fired bricks darkened by years of smoke and heat. These kilns stood quietly at the edges of settlements where wind carried smoke away from crowded streets. The areas around them always smelled different from ordinary neighborhoods. Ash rested on the ground. Smoke drifted through the air even during calm weather. The earth itself became darker from years of burning fuel. And nearby, mountains of raw clay waited patiently for shaping. A brick kiln was not allowed place most of the time. Before firing began, the work moved carefully and quietly. Workers stacked dried bricks inside the kiln with enormous attention. Small gaps had to remain between rows so heat could travel evenly through the structure. Poor stacking ruined entire batches. Experienced workers understood airflow almost instinctively. Where flames would move. Where heat would gather. Where weak circulation might leave bricks underfired. Some kilns held only a few thousand bricks. Others held many more. But regardless of size, Every kiln demanded patience. The workers often spent entire days preparing the stacks before any fire touched the fuel. Inside the kiln, long narrow passages remained open between layers. These allowed flames and hot air to rise gradually upward through the packed bricks. The arrangement almost resembled a puzzle. Everything depended on balance, evenness, steady movement of heat. Then finally, after all the preparation, the fires began. At first the flames remained small, gentle, careful. Too much heat too quickly could destroy the bricks before the moisture deep inside escaped safely. So the workers fed the fires slowly during the early hours. Thin smoke slipped upward into the sky while the kiln warmed little by little. The bricks inside began releasing moisture into the heat. Steam drifted invisibly through the chambers. Workers stayed nearby constantly during this stage, watching, listening, adjusting fuel. Sometimes they touched the outer walls carefully to judge the rising temperature. As evening arrived, the glow inside the kiln deepened. Orange light flickered through lower openings where fuel burned steadily. Smoke thickened overhead and carried the smell of heated clay far across the surrounding land. The firing could continue for many hours, sometimes several days without stopping. This meant workers often remained beside the kiln through entire nights. Those nights possessed a strange quiet beauty. Darkness stretched across the fields while the kiln glowed softly like a giant breathing lantern. Sparks floated upward toward the stars. The sound of burning wood cracked gently in the still air. Workers rested nearby on stools, stones, or folded cloth. Some drank water slowly. Some ate simple meals beside the firelight. Some spoke quietly. Others simply watched the flames in silence. Their faces glowed warm orange against the night. Beyond the kiln, the world slept. Homes stood dark and still beneath moonlight. Dogs barked somewhere far away. Wind moved softly through tall grass. And beside the glowing kiln, the earth itself transformed. Inside the heat, the clay changed structure forever. What had once been soft river mud slowly became hard ceramic brick. The process felt almost magical to ancient workers, even if they understood it through experience rather than science. Mud entered the kiln weak and fragile. It emerged capable of surviving storms, weight, and long years of weather. The fire gave permanence to earth. And permanence changed human settlements deeply. Fired bricks allowed stronger walls, taller buildings, more durable roads, longer-lasting ovens, more reliable drainage systems. Entire sections of cities became sturdier because of the kiln. Still, the work remained exhausting. Kilns demanded enormous amounts of fuel. Workers spent long hours gathering wood, reeds, brush, or coal depending on local resources. In some places, nearby forests slowly disappeared after generations of firing operations consumed so much timber. Cart after cart arrived beside the kilns carrying fuel for future batches. Dust covered everything. Ash settled across clothing and skin. The workers' hands became rough from heat and labor. Yet despite the difficulty, many brickmakers developed deep familiarity with kiln life. The glowing fires, smoky air, and slow rhythm of firing became part of ordinary existence. Children growing up near kilns remembered the smell forever. The warmth of the outer walls during cool evenings. The sparks rising into darkness. The sight of workers feeding fires before dawn. For many families, brickmaking was not temporary work. It was inheritance. Knowledge passed quietly from one generation into the next. A father showed his son how to read smoke color. A mother explained how weather affected drying clay. Grandparents spoke about fires that burned too hot decades earlier and ruined entire kiln loads. These lessons traveled through memory more than writing. Hands teaching hands. Eyes teaching eyes. Time teaching patience. Once the firing reached full temperature, the kiln became almost alive with heat. The air near the openings shimmered violently. Workers wrapped cloth around parts of their faces while feeding fuel into the flames. Inside, the bricks glowed dimly through the darkness. Red. Orange. Sometimes nearly white-hot in the hottest areas. The smell changed too. Less like wet earth now. More like heated stone and smoke. The workers monitored everything carefully because the firing stage could not be abandoned even briefly. A neglected kiln became dangerous quickly. Uneven temperatures created weak bricks. Sudden cooling caused cracking. So the watch continued day and night. And then, after long hours or days, the fires slowly died down. But the work still was not finished. Now came another waiting period. Cooling. Freshly fired bricks could not be removed immediately. The kiln remained dangerously hot long after visible flames disappeared. If cooled too quickly, the bricks sometimes cracked from sudden temperature changes. So the openings were partially sealed. And everyone waited. Again. Brickmaking always returned to waiting. Waiting for clay. Waiting for sun. Waiting for drying. Waiting for fire. Waiting for cooling. The workers rested more during these quieter days. Some repaired tools. Others prepared fresh clay nearby for future batches. Smoke still drifted faintly from the kiln while the enormous mass of heated bricks released warmth into the air. At last, when temperatures dropped enough, the unloading began. This stage brought careful excitement. Workers entered the kiln slowly and examined the results one brick at a time. Good bricks produced a satisfying sound when tapped lightly together. A firm sharp note. Strong. Solid. The color often deepened beautifully after successful firing. Rich reds, dark oranges, and earthy browns appeared depending on clay composition and firing temperature. Some bricks emerged darker near the hottest areas. Others remained lighter toward cooler sections. No two batches looked perfectly identical. And that small imperfection gave handmade bricks much of their quiet beauty. They carried the memory of fire within their surfaces. Not factory perfection, but human variation. Human labor. Human patience. Damaged bricks were set aside. Some cracked. Some warped slightly. Some overheated until surfaces partially melted. But many emerged strong and beautiful. The successful bricks were stacked carefully outside in tall orderly piles. Sunlight warmed their surfaces during the day while cool evening air settled around them at night. And then carts arrived. Oxen. Donkeys. Horses. Workers loaded the bricks slowly onto wooden wagons bound for towns, villages, temples, ovens, homes, and walls. The journey of each brick continued outward into human life. Some became quiet kitchen floors. Some became bakers' ovens glowing warmly before sunrise. Some became chimneys where winter smoke curled upward into pale skies. Some became schools where children learned to read. Some became bridges crossed by countless tired feet. And nearly all of them began the same way. As soft mud resting silently beside water. Far to the southwest of Mesopotamia, another great river moved slowly through ancient lands. The Nile. Long. Quiet. Ancient beyond memory. Each year, its waters rose gently and spread across the surrounding plains. When the flood waters slowly pulled away again, they left behind rich dark soil that felt smooth and heavy beneath human feet. For the people of ancient Egypt, this yearly flooding was not simply part of nature. It was life itself. The river fed the crops. The crops fed the villages. And the mud beside the river helped build the world around them. In the soft early mornings along the Nile, before the desert heat fully arrived, brickmakers walked toward the wet floodplains carrying baskets and wooden tools. Mist sometimes hovered low above the water while birds drifted quietly across pale skies. The air smelled of reeds, river plants, damp earth, and distant cooking fires from nearby villages beginning another day. The villages themselves often rested close to the river banks where water could be reached easily. Palm trees moved softly in the breeze. Mud brick homes stood close together beneath bright sunlight. Narrow paths wound between storage buildings, gardens, animal pens, and shaded courtyards. Children chased each other through dusty lanes while older people sat quietly beneath woven shelters escaping the growing heat of the day. And everywhere, beneath nearly every roof and wall, there were bricks shaped by hand. Egyptian brickmaking developed naturally from the land itself. Stone existed in Egypt and was used for many great monuments, temples, and tombs. But ordinary life depended heavily on mud brick. Most homes were built from it. Workshops, storehouses, bakeries, walls, sleeping rooms, animal shelters, all rising slowly from the dark fertile soil left behind by the Nile. The clay used along the river often mixed naturally with fine silt carried by flood waters. Brickmakers gathered this material carefully during the right seasons when moisture and texture felt suitable for shaping. Workers stepped into shallow muddy areas where the earth pulled gently at their feet. Baskets filled slowly with wet clay while sunlight brightened across the landscape. Nearby, farmers guided oxen through fields of grain. Water shimmered quietly in irrigation channels. Palm leaves rustled softly overhead. Life along the Nile moved according to ancient rhythms. Flood, planting, harvest, dry season. And somewhere within all those cycles, brickmakers continued their patient work. The clay was carried toward open mixing yards where piles of straw waited nearby. Straw played an important role in Egyptian brickmaking. Tiny fibers running through the clay helped strengthen the bricks as they dried beneath the fierce sun. Workers scattered chopped straw into wet mud while others poured water carefully into the mixing pits. Then came the slow blending. Feet pressed into the mud again and again. The mixture thickened, softened, became smoother. Workers moved in circles through the clay while sweat darkened their simple linen clothing. The sun climbed higher overhead. Heat gathered across the open ground. Still the work continued steadily. No rushing. No shouting. Only rhythm. The sound of feet moving through mud became part of the daily atmosphere along the riverbanks. So familiar that many people hardly noticed it anymore. Some workers hummed softly while mixing. Some worked silently. Others exchanged quiet conversation about crops, family members, weather, or river conditions. Brickmaking existed inside ordinary human life, never separate from it. The wooden molds used in Egypt were often simple rectangular frames worn smooth by years of handling. Many had dark stains from constant contact with wet clay and river water. An experienced worker could shape bricks quickly without appearing hurried. A lump of clay lifted carefully, dropped firmly into the mold, pressed into corners, smoothed across the top. Then the mold lifted away, and another fresh brick rested beneath the sunlight. Again, and again, and again. Thousands of times across the years. Rows of wet bricks soon spread across open drying grounds beside the villages. Under the Egyptian sun, the drying process moved steadily, though workers still watched the weather carefully. Even in dry climates, sudden moisture or improper drying could ruin entire batches. So the workers turned bricks periodically to help them dry evenly. They checked for cracks, smoothed damaged edges, adjusted spacing so air moved properly between rows. Children sometimes helped carry water to the workers during the hottest hours. Women brought flat bread, dates, onions, or simple meals beneath cloth coverings. Nearby, donkeys rested beside carts while flies drifted lazily through the heat. The smell of warm mud filled the air. To modern people, the work might appear repetitive. But to ancient brickmakers, repetition itself became a form of stability. Predictable movements. Predictable rhythms. The comfort of familiar labor beneath familiar skies. Generations passed their lives this way. Some villages became known for especially good bricks. Certain clay deposits produced stronger materials. Certain families became respected for their skill with molds and kiln firing. Knowledge passed quietly through observation. A child standing beside a parent in the brickyard learned without formal lessons how wet the clay should feel, how long fresh bricks should rest before moving, how sunlight changed drying speed, how the smell of a kiln revealed its internal heat. All these small understandings slowly settled into memory over many years. The Nile itself shaped nearly every part of this process. During flood seasons, fresh layers of silt renewed the clay sources naturally. Boats moved supplies and finished bricks along the river between settlements. Entire communities depended on the yearly patterns of water and earth remaining steady. And for long stretches of history, they did remain steady. The river rose. The river fell. The fields turned green. The brickmakers returned to work. Again and again. Many workers lived modest lives close to the brickyards themselves. Their homes often looked similar to the structures they helped build for others. Mud brick walls. Flat roofs. Cool interior rooms protected from the sun. Small courtyards where cooking fires burned in the evenings. Inside these homes, daily life unfolded slowly. Grain was ground into flour using heavy stone tools. Water jars rested against cool walls. Simple lamps flickered after sunset. Families gathered quietly while desert winds moved outside through the darkness. The brick walls helped regulate temperature surprisingly well. During hot afternoons, the interiors remained cooler than the burning sunlight outside. At night, the thick walls slowly released stored warmth back into the rooms. The bricks breathed gently with the climate around them. This made mud brick architecture deeply suited to Egyptian life. Even large administrative buildings and workshops often relied heavily on brick construction. While stone monuments survived most famously through history, the everyday Egypt experienced by ordinary people was largely a world of brick. The baker's oven, the storage room, the sleeping space, the market wall, the courtyard bench warmed by afternoon sun. Brick surrounded ordinary existence quietly and constantly. During periods of large state building projects, enormous numbers of bricks were required. Laborers worked in organized groups near the river, shaping and drying bricks by the thousands. Supervisors counted supplies carefully. Water carriers moved constantly between the river and the workyards. Animals hauled loads across dusty ground while workers shielded their eyes from bright sunlight. Yet even large operations still depended on human hands. Human pacing. Human patience. No machine could replace the feel of clay between fingers. No machine watched the sky for the perfect drying weather. No machine understood the river the way generations of workers understood it. And so the process remained deeply human. As evening approached along the Nile, the workyard slowly quieted. Shadows stretched across the drying fields. Birds settled among reeds beside the water. The fierce daytime heat softened little by little. Workers washed clay from their hands and legs at the river's edge. Mud drifted slowly away into the current while the sky turned shades of gold and deep orange above the palm trees. Some workers sat quietly after the long day, watching the water move. The river never hurried. It flowed with calm certainty through the ancient land. And perhaps the brickmakers themselves slowly learned that same rhythm from the Nile. Steady work. Steady seasons. Steady patience. One brick after another beneath the endless sky. Not every brick in history belonged to a great city. Not every wall surrounded temples, palaces, or monuments. Most bricks lived quieter lives. They became ordinary homes standing beside narrow dirt paths. They became cooking ovens behind small gardens. They became simple chimneys releasing thin trails of smoke into cold morning air. And for countless generations, village brickmakers worked far from famous capitals or wealthy rulers. Their worlds were smaller, quieter, closer to the rhythm of seasons and weather. In many regions across the ancient and medieval world, villages rested near clay-rich land almost by necessity. Good earth mattered. A settlement built beside poor soil faced difficulties not only in farming, but also in construction. People noticed these things carefully long ago. A village with strong clay could repair walls after storms, build larger ovens, strengthen storage rooms against rain and pests. Over time, those advantages mattered deeply. So many villages slowly grew beside rivers, ponds, marshes, or low muddy ground where usable clay rested beneath the surface. The mornings in these places often began softly. Before sunrise, the world felt cool and gray. Thin smoke drifted upward from the first cooking fires while dew rested on grass and roof edges. Roosters called from fenced yards. Dogs stretched lazily beneath wooden carts. Then the villagers slowly stepped into another day. Farmers moved toward fields carrying simple tools over their shoulders. Women carried water jars from wells or riverbanks. Children still half asleep rubbed their eyes beside doorways. And somewhere nearby, the brickmakers began their work again. The brickyards in small villages rarely looked impressive. Most were open spaces near clay pits or water sources. There were no grand buildings. No permanent machinery. Only piles of earth. Wooden molds. Drying fields. And sometimes a kiln darkened by years of smoke. The clay itself often came from shallow pits dug gradually over many seasons. Rainwater collected there during wet months, creating muddy pools where frogs croaked in the evenings and insects drifted above the surface. Workers cut blocks of damp clay from the pit walls using iron blades or wooden shovels. The earth peeled away heavily, cool beneath the morning air. Each load was carried slowly toward the mixing area. Nothing about village brickmaking moved quickly. There was always time involved. Time in gathering. Time in mixing. Time in drying. Time in firing. The work followed natural rhythms more than schedules. During rainy seasons, production slowed or stopped entirely in some regions. Wet weather ruined drying bricks too easily. Workers turned their attention toward repairing tools, tending animals, or helping with harvests instead. Then dry weather returned. The sun warmed the ground again. And brickmaking resumed. This seasonal pace shaped village life deeply. Entire communities understood when brickmaking season had arrived. Children noticed fresh rows of clay bricks appearing across open fields. The smell of wet earth returned to the village air. Carts carried bundles of straw toward the work yards. The brickmakers themselves often belonged to families that had practiced the trade for generations. Grandparents remembered older kilns that had collapsed decades earlier. Parents taught children how to shape clean corners inside wooden molds. Knowledge traveled through stories as much as instruction. A father might explain how one summer storm destroyed hundreds of drying bricks many years before. An older worker might describe how certain clay from deeper ground resisted cracking better during intense heat. These lessons became part of community memory. Simple, practical, quietly valuable. In smaller villages, brickmakers usually knew everyone around them. They built homes for neighbors they had spoken with since childhood. They repaired ovens for families who shared meals with them during festivals and harvest seasons. The work felt personal. A brickmaker could walk through the village and point quietly toward walls built by his own hands years earlier. That house. That chimney. That bakery oven. Those courtyard steps. His labor remained visible everywhere. And yet, most village brickmakers lived modestly. Their hands became rough and stained from years of clay and smoke. Their clothing carried the smell of earth. Their backs ached after long hours bending over molds and drying fields. Still, many continued the trade because it connected naturally with the land around them. The materials came directly from nearby earth. The fuel came from nearby forests or fields. The finished bricks stayed within the community itself. Nothing traveled very far. Everything remained local. Intimate. Familiar. In many villages, entire families helped during busy periods. Older children carried water buckets carefully between the wells and mixing pits. Younger children stacked straw into dry piles. Women prepared meals for groups of workers resting beneath shade structures during midday heat. The brickyard became part of village life rather than a separate workplace. People passed through constantly. Neighbors stopped to speak briefly. Animals wandered nearby. Smoke drifted from cooking fires while fresh bricks dried under sunlight only a short distance away. The sounds were gentle and repetitive. Mud pressed beneath feet. Wood scraping across molds. Distant hammering from a carpenter's shop. Wind moving through trees. A donkey cart creaking slowly along the road. Nothing dramatic. Only ordinary life unfolding hour by hour. The drying fields often became beautiful in quiet ways during late afternoon. Long rows of bricks stretched across golden light while shadows slowly lengthened over the ground. Dust floated softly through warm air. Workers moved carefully between the rows inspecting surfaces for cracks or warping. Some bricks needed turning. Others required extra drying time. Patience mattered enormously here. An impatient worker ruined good clay. A careful worker created bricks that survived decades. Perhaps even centuries. The kilns in villages varied greatly from place to place. Some communities used permanent structures built carefully over many years. Others relied on temporary firing stacks assembled only when enough bricks had accumulated. Temporary kilns were fascinating in their own quiet way. Workers stacked unfired bricks into large rectangular masses with channels left open for fuel and airflow. Wood, brush, or dried grass filled the lower spaces. Then the entire structure became both kiln and product at the same time. When fired, the outer layers protected the inner bricks while heat traveled slowly through the stack. Smoke drifted across the fields for days during firing periods. Villagers could smell it long before reaching the brickyard. The scent of wood smoke mixed with heated clay became deeply familiar. At night, The kilns glowed softly against the darkness. Sparks rose into the sky while workers watched the fires carefully from nearby stools or blankets spread across the ground. The surrounding villages often looked peaceful during those hours. Small windows glowing faintly. Dogs barking occasionally in the distance. Wind carrying smoke through sleeping streets. And beside the kiln, workers quietly feeding the fire beneath the stars. Some firing periods lasted through cold nights. Workers wrapped themselves in heavy cloth while warming their hands near the kiln openings. Tea or thin soup simmered nearby over smaller fires. Conversation stayed low and slow. People spoke differently at night beside a kiln. Softer. More thoughtful. Perhaps because the darkness encouraged quietness. Perhaps because exhaustion settled deeply into tired muscles after long labor. Or perhaps because watching fire itself always made humans reflective. The unloading days felt calmer. Almost relieved. Workers opened the cooled kilns carefully and inspected the results. Strong bricks produced clean, sharp sounds when tapped together. Weak bricks cracked or crumbled too easily. The successful bricks were stacked into neat piles awaiting transport. Then village life absorbed them naturally. A newly married couple might use them to build a small home near the edge of the settlement. A baker might repair an old oven damaged by years of heat. A farmer might strengthen storage walls before the rainy season arrived again. And slowly, almost invisibly, the village changed shape over the years through the patient work of brickmakers. Walls became straighter. Homes became warmer. Roads became more durable. Chimneys rose higher. All because ordinary people stood quietly beside wet earth and shaped it carefully with their hands. As night settled fully across those villages, the brickyards eventually grew silent. The drying fields rested beneath moonlight. Kilns released their final traces of warmth into cool air. And somewhere nearby, families slept peacefully inside homes built from the same earth beneath their feet. As centuries passed and the ancient world slowly changed, brickmaking continued quietly through the lives of ordinary people. Empires faded. Roads cracked. Old cities weakened beneath wind and time. Yet the earth remained where it had always been. Clay still waited beside rivers and marshes. And human hands still shaped it into shelter. During the medieval centuries across Europe, parts of Asia, and many other regions, towns slowly began growing again after long periods of uncertainty and change. Markets expanded. Trade routes reopened. Villages became busier. And with growth came the familiar need for bricks. Not suddenly. Not all at once. But gradually, like dawn spreading across fields. Many medieval towns looked very different from the organized cities of earlier ancient empires. Streets often curved naturally around older paths and waterways. Houses leaned close together. Roofs nearly touched above narrow lanes in crowded areas. Wood remained common in many places, especially in forested regions. Timber houses lined muddy streets while smoke drifted from fireplaces into gray skies. But wood carried dangers. Fires spread quickly through tightly packed towns. One overturned lamp. One kitchen spark. One careless ember during dry weather. And entire streets could disappear into smoke and flame. So over time, more communities turned again toward brick. Brick resisted fire better than wood. Brick survived rain more steadily. Brick endured generations when properly made. And so, in quiet fields beyond medieval towns, the old work continued once more. The brickyards of medieval Europe often rested near rivers where clay deposits remained thick and workable. Workers traveled there before sunrise carrying tools worn smooth by years of use. The mornings could feel cold in northern regions. Fog drifted across wet ground. Boots pressed into damp grass. Workers breathed pale clouds into the air while distant church bells echoed softly from sleeping towns. The brickmakers moved without hurry. Their work could not be rushed even if they wanted it to be. Clay still demanded patience. The gathering process remained much like it had been for thousands of years. Workers dug clay from pits using iron spades and wooden shovels. Horse carts creaked slowly beneath heavy loads while mud clung thickly to boots and wheels. Some clay pits became enormous after generations of use. Rainwater collected inside them during wet months, turning parts into shallow ponds edged with reeds and weeds. Birds nested nearby. Frogs croaked after sunset. The land itself slowly changed shape because of brickmaking. Workers often understood their local clay deeply. Certain areas produced pale bricks. Others created rich red tones after firing. Some clay contained too much sand. Some remained too sticky. Experienced brickmakers could often identify good earth simply by holding it briefly in their hands. Too dry. Too gritty. Too soft. Too heavy. The knowledge lived inside touch and memory. Nothing written. Nothing measured precisely. Only years of observation passed quietly between generations. The mixing pits beside medieval brickyards looked rough and muddy most of the time. Straw lay piled nearby beneath simple coverings to keep it dry. Water barrels stood beside the pits waiting for use. Workers stepped into the clay again just as ancient laborers had done centuries earlier. Back and forth. Slowly. Rhythmically. Their boots disappeared beneath wet earth while the mixture thickened under steady movement. The smell surrounding these pits never changed very much across history. Wet soil. Grass. Smoke. Sweat. Rain in the distance. Earth itself. Sometimes music drifted faintly from nearby villages while the workers mixed clay beneath cloudy skies. Blacksmiths hammered iron somewhere beyond the fields. Dogs barked beside farmhouses. Church bells marked the passing hours. Yet the brickyards remained their own quiet world. A slower world. Once the clay reached the proper texture, shaping began. Medieval wooden molds often showed years of wear. Their edges became rounded from constant handling. Some families owned molds passed down through generations of brickmakers. The shaping process demanded skill and speed balanced carefully together. A worker grabbed wet clay, pressed it firmly into the mold, removed excess material with a flat wooden blade, then lifted the frame smoothly away. Fresh bricks rested behind in long growing rows. The work repeated endlessly throughout the day. Hands became coated in clay. Sleeves darkened with mud. Lower backs ached from bending. Still the rows continued expanding across the drying grounds beneath open sky. During warmer months, entire fields outside medieval towns sometimes filled with drying bricks. Travelers approaching from distant roads could see long orderly lines stretching beside the fields while workers moved carefully between them. The site became part of the landscape itself. Some towns became famous for their bricks, especially in regions where suitable stone remained difficult to obtain. In parts of northern Europe, brick architecture slowly shaped the appearance of entire cities. Churches, warehouses, towers, and merchant homes rose from fired clay produced by generations of local workers. The color of towns changed. Warm reds, dark browns, dusty oranges beneath gray skies. Rain falling against brick walls created deep rich colors that glowed softly during cloudy evenings. And inside those walls, ordinary life continued quietly. The firing process during medieval times grew more organized in many places. Permanent kilns became larger and more carefully engineered. Skilled kiln masters understood airflow and temperature with remarkable intuition. These men spent years learning how fire behaved inside enclosed spaces, how heat traveled upward, how smoke revealed hidden problems, how changing weather affected firing quality. The kilns themselves often stood like dark towers near the edges of towns. Smoke drifted from them steadily during active firing periods. Ash settled over nearby grass and rooftops. The smell of burning wood and heated clay became familiar to entire communities. People could often tell from the smoke whether a kiln was beginning a firing cycle or nearing completion. At night, the glow from kiln openings illuminated the surrounding darkness softly. Workers watched the fires carefully through long cold evenings while wind moved across the fields. Some workers slept nearby during important firings because the kiln required constant attention. Fuel had to be added steadily. Temperatures needed careful management. A single mistake could ruin weeks of labor. So the kiln masters remained patient, alert, quietly focused. The medieval world moved more slowly than modern life, and brickmaking fit naturally into that slower pace. Buildings took years to complete. Cathedrals sometimes required generations. Walls were repaired gradually over decades. People expected long processes. They lived inside them. And brickmakers understood this deeply. A good brick was not made quickly. It was made carefully. The finished bricks traveled into growing towns by horse cart along muddy roads. Wheels rattled over stones and wooden bridges while workers unloaded the heavy cargo beside construction sites. Builders stacked bricks into walls one careful layer at a time. Mortar spread between them slowly. The structures rose gradually against the sky. A bakery, a workshop, a merchant's home, a monastery wall, a narrow chimney releasing smoke into winter air. All built from earth shaped by patient hands. Inside medieval towns, brick changed daily life quietly but powerfully. Brick ovens held heat more effectively for bakers. Brick chimneys improved indoor fires during cold weather. Brick walls reduced the spread of destructive fires that haunted crowded wooden neighborhoods. Even the sounds inside brick buildings differed slightly. Footsteps echoed differently against brick floors. Rain sounded softer on thick walls. Warmth lingered longer during winter nights. The material shaped atmosphere itself. During cold evenings, families gathered beside fireplaces built from handmade bricks while candles flickered against dark walls. Soup simmered slowly in iron pots. Wind rattled shutters outside. And somewhere beyond the town, in muddy fields beneath moonlight, more bricks waited in silent rows for the next stage of their long journey into human life. The brickmakers themselves rarely became wealthy. Their work remained physically exhausting and often seasonal. Rain interrupted drying. Freezing temperatures damaged fresh clay. Fuel shortages complicated firing schedules. Still, many continued the trade because communities depended on them. Without brickmakers, towns grew more vulnerable, more temporary, more fragile against weather and fire. So year after year, generation after generation, workers continued stepping into wet clay before sunrise while church bells echoed softly through the misty medieval air. And slowly, almost unnoticed by history itself, the towns of the world rose brick by brick beneath their patient hands. Before a single brick could dry beneath the sun. Before smoke drifted upward from the kilns. Before homes, bakeries, bridges, and chimneys slowly rose against the sky. There was always the clay pit. quiet, heavy, deep with earth and water. For brickmakers throughout history, the clay pit was the true beginning of everything. It was not a beautiful place in the ordinary sense. Most clay pits were muddy, uneven, wet after rain, and exhausting to work inside. Yet entire towns depended upon them. Entire cities slowly grew from the material pulled out of those dark damp holes in the ground. The work there was among the hardest parts of brickmaking, and among the quietest. In the early morning, before sunlight fully reached the bottom of the pits, workers descended slowly carrying tools over their shoulders. Cold air often settled low inside the excavation areas while mist clung to the wet ground. The earth smelled rich and heavy, like rain-soaked soil after a storm, like riverbanks during flood season, like the deep hidden layers beneath fields and roads. Workers understood quickly that not all earth was useful. Good brick clay needed certain qualities. It had to hold together without crumbling. It could not contain too many stones or roots. It needed enough smoothness to shape properly, yet enough strength to dry without collapsing. Finding the right clay sometimes required years of experience. Older workers often knew exactly where the best material rested beneath the surface. They remembered which areas became too sandy after heavy rain, which sections remained moist during dry summers, which layers produced stronger fired bricks. The knowledge felt almost geological, though the workers rarely used scientific words. They simply knew the land, knew its moods, knew its hidden qualities. The clay itself often rested below ordinary topsoil. Workers first removed layers of grass, roots, and loose dirt before reaching the dense heavier material beneath. Iron spades cut downward slowly. Shovels scraped against wet ground. Mud clung stubbornly to boots and tools. The labor demanded strength. Real strength. A full basket of wet clay weighed heavily against shoulders and arms. Cartwheels sank into soft ground. Workers slipped occasionally in deep mud, especially after rainstorms filled parts of the pits with water. And still the work continued. Day after day. Season after season. The deeper pits became strangely quiet places. Their walls rose around the workers, blocking wind and distant sounds from nearby towns. Inside, only the scraping of tools and the soft movement of wet earth remained. Sometimes birds nested along the edges where grass and weeds grew. Sometimes water seeped slowly from underground into the lower sections, forming shallow pools reflecting the pale sky overhead. Children occasionally visited with food or water for their parents working below. They climbed carefully along muddy paths while carrying bread wrapped in cloth or buckets swinging gently from their hands. For many families, the clay pit became part of childhood memory. The smell, the damp air, the echo of shovels against earth, the sight of tired workers coated in mud by midday. In some regions, the pits expanded year after year until they resembled small valleys carved by human labor rather than nature itself. Entire landscapes slowly changed shape because generations of brickmakers removed earth from the same locations. Trees disappeared. Hills lowered. Water gathered in abandoned sections. Grass reclaimed older excavation areas after the workers moved elsewhere. The land quietly remembered every brick ever made from it. Weather controlled much of the labor inside the pits. Heavy rain turned pathways slippery and dangerous. Water filled low areas quickly. During extremely dry seasons, some clay hardened too much near the surface and required additional soaking before removal. Winter created different difficulties. Frozen ground resisted shovels. Cold mud stiffened hands painfully. Workers wrapped themselves in thick clothing while breathing pale clouds into icy morning air. Yet the demand for bricks rarely disappeared entirely. Repairs still needed doing. Buildings still rose. Ovens still required maintenance. So the workers adapted to the seasons as best they could. Some brickmakers developed special methods for storing clay through colder months. Large piles were covered with straw or cloth to protect moisture. In some places, workers gathered extra clay during warmer seasons to prepare for winter shortages. Everything required planning. Nothing happened instantly. The movement of clay from pit to yard formed its own slow rhythm. Horse carts creaked beneath enormous loads while workers guided them carefully across uneven roads. In smaller operations, baskets balanced across shoulders carried the material instead. The journey often covered only short distances, yet it consumed hours of exhausting effort. Mud splashed against clothing. Wheels became trapped. Animals strained against heavy weight. And always the clay remained stubbornly heavy. Once the material reached the work yards, another stage of labor began immediately. The clay had to be sorted carefully before mixing. Stones were removed by hand. Roots and plant material pulled away. Workers knelt beside piles of damp earth performing this repetitive task patiently. Piece by piece. Handful by handful. The sorting process could feel endless during large production periods. Yet it mattered greatly. Even small stones hidden inside finished bricks could create cracks during firing. Experienced workers noticed imperfections quickly. Their fingers learned to feel problems before their eyes saw them. In many brickmaking communities, the clay pit workers held a certain quiet respect among laborers because everyone understood the difficulty of their task. They handled the raw earth before anyone else touched it. Without them, nothing further could happen. No molds. No drying rows. No kilns glowing through the night. Only empty yards waiting for clay. The physical toll of the work appeared slowly across the years. Shoulders stiffened from lifting. Hands roughened deeply. Knees and backs carried constant soreness from standing in uneven ground for long hours. Yet many workers continued the labor for decades. Perhaps because the work felt honest in a very old human way. The earth resisted. The worker responded. Simple. Direct. Real. There were no hidden processes in the clay pit. Only effort. Mud. Weight. Time. Some workers formed deep attachments to particular pits where they had spent much of their lives. They knew every slope and water channel. They remembered where cave-ins had once occurred after storms. They recalled summers when the clay dried unusually fast or winters when freezing rain made the paths dangerous. The pits became landscapes of memory. A man might stand beside a quiet excavation late in life and remember decades of labor resting inside the earth around him. Conversations shared during cold mornings. Songs sung during long afternoons. Friends who once worked there but were now gone. Entire lives mixed silently into the clay. As industrial changes slowly approached parts of the world centuries later, some clay pits grew larger and more organized. Yet even with new tools and transportation methods, much of the basic labor remained stubbornly ancient. The earth still had to be dug, lifted, moved, prepared. No machine fully replaced the human understanding of good clay for a very long time. And perhaps that is why old brickmakers often seem deeply connected to the land itself. Their work forced them to study the earth closely every single day. Its moisture, its texture, its color after rain, its smell during summer heat. They noticed small changes others ignored. The clay pit taught patience through necessity. A careless worker exhausted himself too quickly. A thoughtful worker learned rhythm. Lift carefully. Walk steadily. Rest briefly. Continue. The body adapted to repetition over time. As evening approached, the pit slowly emptied. Workers climbed upward carrying tools coated with mud while long shadows stretched across the ground. The air cooled. Birds crossed the sky overhead on their way toward trees and marshes. Behind the workers, the clay pit rested quietly in fading light. Dark earth walls. Still water pools. Fresh shovel marks waiting for tomorrow. And beneath everything, deeper layers of untouched clay still waited silently underground for future hands to uncover them. When people imagine the history of brickmaking, they often picture only the workers standing knee-deep in clay or feeding great kilns through the night. But the world surrounding brickmaking was always larger than the brickyards themselves. Much larger. Entire families lived within its rhythm. Women carried water and food across dusty paths toward the workers. Children learned the smell of wet earth before they learned many other things. Older grandparents rested in shaded courtyards while listening to the distant sounds of molds striking clay somewhere beyond the village. Brickmaking was never only labor. It was community. Daily life. Memory. The slow passing of ordinary days. In villages and towns throughout history, brickyards often stood close enough that families heard the work constantly. The soft scrape of wooden tools, the movement of carts, the crackling fires of kilns at night, these sounds became part of the atmosphere of home itself. Many women played essential roles in the process even when history books rarely mentioned them. In smaller communities especially, labor was shared naturally among family members. Someone gathered straw. Someone carried water. Someone repaired tools. Someone prepared meals for exhausted workers returning after sunset. Without these quiet forms of labor, brickmaking itself could not continue smoothly. In warm climates, women often walked early in the morning balancing clay jars or woven baskets filled with water from wells, rivers, or ponds. Their footsteps crossed familiar dusty paths while sunrise slowly brightened the fields. The water mattered enormously. Clay required moisture. Workers needed drinking water beneath the heat. Kiln fires demanded careful management. Everything depended on carrying and storing enough water throughout the day. The work could be exhausting in its own quiet way. Heavy jars pressed against shoulders. Long walks repeated daily. Hot sun rising overhead. Still, the movement became routine through repetition. The body learned the rhythm. The villages learned the rhythm too. Children often accompanied the adults. Some carried smaller buckets proudly despite their weight. Others gathered fallen branches or bundles of dry grass for kiln fuel. In many brickmaking families, children began helping naturally at very young ages, not through harsh formal training, but simply because work surrounded everyday life. A child growing up near a brickyard watched constantly. Watched clay being mixed. Watched molds lifting from fresh bricks. Watched workers checking the sky for rain. Without realizing it, the child slowly absorbed generations of practical knowledge. Some children shaped tiny practice bricks from leftover clay while playing beside the work yards. Their small hands copied the movements of adults instinctively. They built miniature walls or pretend ovens in the dirt while nearby workers smiled quietly at their efforts. To outsiders, these scenes might have looked ordinary. But inside those ordinary moments, knowledge passed silently from one generation into the next. No formal lessons. Only observation. Repetition. Memory. In larger towns, families connected to brickmaking often lived in neighborhoods close to the kilns and clay pits. Their homes carried the marks of the trade everywhere. Dust settled across window sills. Clothing smelled faintly of smoke and earth. Tools rested beside doorways. Even after washing, workers' hands often remained stained with traces of clay deep beneath the fingernails. The children noticed these details without thinking about them very much. To them, the smell of warm brick dust or kiln smoke felt normal. Comforting even. It smelled like home. Meals around brick-making communities were usually simple but deeply important after long labor. During midday rests, families gathered beneath shaded areas beside the yards. Bread wrapped in cloth was shared carefully. Bowls of soup, onions, olives, beans, rice, or stewed vegetables appeared depending on the region and season. The workers ate slowly while resting tired muscles. Conversations remained calm. Quiet complaints about weather. Talk about animals. Harvest worries. Stories from neighboring villages. Nothing dramatic. Only ordinary people carrying ordinary lives through difficult work. Sometimes older family members who no longer possessed the strength for heavy labor still contributed through smaller tasks. Grandmothers repaired worn clothing. Grandfathers sharpened tools slowly while sitting outside during cool evenings. The entire household often revolved around the demands of brick-making seasons. When drying weather looked favorable, everyone understood the importance of using the opportunity well. When storms threatened, anxiety spread quietly through the community. Rain could destroy weeks of work. Entire fields of drying bricks might soften or crack after sudden bad weather. And so families watched the sky together. Clouds gathering in the distance could change the mood of an entire village. Some people hurried to cover fresh bricks with cloth or straw. Others moved tools beneath shelter. Workers checked drainage channels around the yards. The weather itself became almost like another member of the community, powerful, unpredictable, deeply respected. Women also helped directly with shaping bricks in many places throughout history, especially during periods of high demand or family-based production. Their hands pressed clay into molds just like the men beside them. Their feet mixed mud in the pits. Their backs carried heavy loads across uneven ground. Yet much of this labor remained unrecorded in official histories. The brick survived. The names disappeared. This happened often throughout human history. Quiet labor left quiet traces. In the evenings after long days of work, families returned home slowly through cooling air while smoke rose from village chimneys. Children sometimes fell asleep early from exhaustion after helping in the yards. Workers washed clay from their arms and feet beside wells or riverbanks while the last sunlight faded across the fields. Inside the homes, life slowed further. Oil lamps flickered softly against brick walls. Wind moved gently outside. The smell of soup or bread filled small rooms. Some families told stories quietly before sleep. Others simply rested in silence after exhausting labor. And always, the brick walls surrounding them held traces of the same work shaping their lives each day. There was something deeply circular about it. The workers built homes from earth. Then returned to those homes to sleep before beginning again. Generation after generation. In colder regions, winter evenings around brick-making families could feel especially intimate. Snow or freezing rain pressed softly against shutters while fires glowed inside brick hearths. Workers repaired molds beside candlelight or prepared ropes and tools for future seasons. Children listened to older relatives speak about famous fires, dangerous storms, or years when the clay pits flooded badly. The stories became part of family identity. A grandfather might point toward an old chimney visible through the window and quietly say he helped shape those bricks 50 years earlier. A mother might remember carrying water to the yards as a little girl beside her own parents. The work connected generations together through memory. Not glamorous memory. Not heroic memory. Just ordinary human continuity. The kind built slowly through repeated days and shared labor. Festivals and rest days offered brief pauses from the routine. During certain holidays or religious celebrations, the brickyards grew quieter. Families gathered in cleaner clothing. Music drifted through villages. Food became more generous when possible. Yet even during celebration, the presence of brickmaking remained nearby. Kilns cooled in the distance. Clay pits waited silently beyond the fields. Fresh rows of drying bricks rested beneath moonlight. The work never disappeared completely. It simply paused briefly before beginning again. As towns expanded and generations passed, entire family histories became tied to brickmaking. Certain surnames became associated with kiln work, clay preparation, or mold carving. People recognized one another by trade as much as by blood. And although history often focused on kings, wars, and monuments, the quieter truth remained beneath everything. Civilization survived because ordinary families woke each morning and continued their work. Carrying water. Mixing clay. Feeding fires. Repairing walls. Raising children. One slow day at a time beneath the changing sky. Once the bricks cooled inside the kilns and rested in tall stacks beneath open skies, another long journey quietly began. The journey away from the brickyard. Away from the clay pits. Away from the smoke and mud and drying fields. A brick might spend only days being shaped, but it could travel for weeks before finally reaching the wall where it would rest for generations. And that journey was slow. Very slow. Across much of history, moving bricks from one place to another required enormous effort. Bricks were heavy even in small numbers. A single cart filled with fired clay placed tremendous strain on wooden wheels, animals, and rough roads. Yet towns continued growing. Homes continued rising. And so the roads carried bricks endlessly across the landscape. In the pale light before dawn, transport workers prepared the carts carefully beside the brickyards. Horses stamped softly in cold morning air while leather straps creaked under tension. Oxen stood patiently chewing in silence as workers tightened ropes around heavy loads. Nearby, the stacks of finished bricks waited quietly. Warm earthy colors glowing softly beneath sunrise. Some bricks still carried traces of ash from the kilns. Others showed darker patches where heat had burned stronger during firing. No two loads looked perfectly identical. And perhaps that small imperfection gave handmade bricks their quiet beauty. Every brick carried the memory of human hands. Human weather. Human patience. The loading itself demanded care. Workers lifted bricks one by one into carts, stacking them tightly so the weight stayed balanced during travel. A poorly loaded cart could tip easily on uneven roads. The sounds of loading became deeply familiar near brickyards. Brick against brick. Wood creaking. Footsteps in dirt. Quiet voices giving instructions. The workers moved steadily without wasting energy. Brick transport was tiring enough already. Most understood the importance of pacing themselves through long days. Once loaded, the carts rolled slowly outward toward towns, villages, river docks, and construction sites. The roads of earlier centuries were rarely smooth. Many were narrow dirt paths shaped gradually by years of footsteps, wagon wheels, and animal traffic. Rain turned them muddy. Summer heat dried them into rough hardened tracks filled with cracks and dust. Travelers often heard brick carts long before seeing them. Heavy wheels rattled over stones. Harness chains clinked softly. Animals breathed heavily beneath the weight. And through the mist or dust, the cart slowly appeared carrying stacks of earth transformed by fire. The movement of bricks became part of everyday life in growing regions. Villagers stepped aside as loaded wagons passed through narrow streets. Children watched curiously from roadside fences. Bakers smelled the dust drifting behind the carts while opening their ovens before sunrise. In busy towns, brick deliveries arrived constantly during active building seasons. Construction sites waited impatiently for new materials while workers prepared foundations or repaired damaged walls. Still, the carts could only move as fast as the roads allowed. As fast as the animals could endure. As fast as weather permitted. Rain often created enormous difficulties. Wheels sank deep into mud. Horses struggled against slipping ground. Workers pushed from behind while boots disappeared into wet earth. Some journeys stopped completely after storms. The bricks waited beneath coverings while roads slowly dried again. And so, once more, brickmaking returned to patience. Everything in the process required waiting eventually. Even transportation. River travel sometimes offered easier movement where waterways existed. Along rivers such as the Nile, the Rhine, the Tigris, or countless smaller waterways across the world, boats carried bricks quietly between settlements. These journeys possessed their own calm rhythm. Flat-bottomed barges drifted slowly through misty mornings loaded with heavy stacks of brick. Water lapped softly against wooden sides while birds crossed overhead. The current carried the cargo steadily past reeds, farms, villages, and sleeping riverbanks. Boatmen guided the vessels patiently beneath changing skies. Some days the water remained smooth and reflective. Other days strong winds slowed progress. Yet river transport often proved gentler on both animals and roads than overland hauling. Entire riverside communities depended on this movement of brick and clay materials. Docks filled with workers unloading cargo while merchants tracked deliveries carefully. The smell near these river landings mixed many things together. Wet wood, river mud, smoke, fish, fresh cut reeds, and always, the faint dusty smell of fired clay. As trade expanded through medieval and early modern periods, some brickmakers began producing bricks not only for nearby villages but for distant towns as well. Certain regions became known for especially strong or beautiful brick. Builders preferred particular colors, particular textures, particular strengths after firing. And so brick traveled farther than ever before. Merchant records from various centuries quietly mention deliveries of thousands upon thousands of bricks moving toward expanding cities. Yet behind those simple numbers rested exhausting physical labor. Every brick had been lifted many times already. Lifted from clay pits. Lifted into molds. Lifted into drying rows. Lifted into kilns. Lifted into carts. And still the lifting continued at the destination. Workers unloading shipments often formed long human chains beside construction sites. Bricks passed steadily from hand to hand beneath the sun or through cold rain. The labor could numb the arms after hours. Dust coated clothing and skin. Fingers became sore and cracked. Yet the wall slowly rose. One brick at a time. In some cities, special storage yards developed near major building projects. Here the bricks waited beneath cloth coverings or wooden shelters until builders needed them. During busy seasons, entire neighborhoods echoed with construction sounds from dawn until evening. Masons tapped bricks carefully into place. Mortar spread across growing walls. Scaffolding creaked in the wind. And below everything, piles of transported bricks slowly disappeared into the rising structures. The workers hauling bricks rarely became famous. Most remained invisible to history. Yet entire civilizations quietly depended upon their endurance. Without transport, the kilns alone meant nothing. Without roads, canals, and patient labor, the bricks could never become homes or bridges or schools. The movement itself mattered. In colder regions during winter, transporting bricks became especially difficult. Snow-buried roads. Ice made wheels dangerous. Animals tired more quickly in freezing winds. Some transport workers wrapped cloth around their faces while guiding carts through silent snowy landscapes. Their breath drifted pale into gray air while frozen wheels groaned over hardened ground. Yet even then, some deliveries continued. Cities never fully stopped needing repair. Fires still damaged buildings. Storms still weakened walls. Human settlements always required maintenance. Always required rebuilding. And so the slow movement of brick continued through every season. At night, transport workers often rested beside roadside inns, barns, or temporary camps during longer journeys. Horses drank quietly from troughs while exhausted workers sat near fires warming stiff hands. The carts rested nearby beneath darkness. Silent. Heavy. Waiting for morning. Some workers slept beneath blankets directly beside their cargo during warm weather. Others watched over the loads carefully to prevent theft or damage. The road created its own quiet world. A world of wheels. Dust. Rain. Animals. An endless gradual movement. By the time a brick finally reached its destination, it had already lived many stages of existence. It had rested underground for centuries as untouched clay. It had been cut from the earth by human labor. Mixed with water and straw. Shaped inside wooden molds. Dried beneath sunlight. Hardened by fire. Carried across roads and rivers. And only then did it finally arrive where builders placed it carefully into walls that might outlive everyone involved in its making. Perhaps that is part of why old brick buildings feel strangely alive sometimes. They hold so many journeys inside them. So much labor. So much weather. So many ordinary hands touching the same material across time. And as twilight settled across dusty roads and quiet rivers, another cart of bricks slowly moved toward another growing town beneath the fading evening sky. The rise of great cities did not happen all at once. No enormous capital appeared suddenly beneath the morning sun fully formed and complete. Instead, cities grew slowly. Patiently. One street. One wall. One workshop. One brick at a time. Across centuries, countless ordinary workers shaped the foundations of urban life with tired hands coated in clay dust. Most of their names disappeared long ago, but their labor remained standing in towers, courtyards, arches, ovens, chimneys, and roads long after they themselves were gone. And perhaps nowhere was the quiet power of brickmaking more visible than in the growing cities of the medieval and early modern world. As population slowly increased, towns expanded outward beyond their older walls. New districts appeared beside rivers and roads. Markets became crowded. Warehouses multiplied near docks and trade routes. Everywhere people looked, construction continued. The sound of hammers echoed through narrow streets. Scaffolding creaked in the wind. Carts loaded with brick rolled steadily through gates before sunrise. The city seemed alive with gradual movement. Yet even during periods of rapid growth, the pace still felt slow compared to the modern world. Buildings rose over years. Sometimes decades. Large churches and public halls might require the labor of multiple generations before completion. A young apprentice helping carry bricks to a construction site could grow old while repairs and additions still continued on the same structure. People expected this. Long work belonged naturally to life. And brickmakers belonged naturally to long work. In cities where brick became the dominant building material, the entire atmosphere slowly changed. Streets reflected warmer colors during sunset. Rain darkened walls into deep shades of red and brown. Smoke drifted upward from endless rows of chimneys during winter evenings. The cities breathed through brick. In Northern Europe especially, where suitable building stone often remained difficult to transport, fired brick transformed urban architecture. Large brick churches rose above flat landscapes. Merchant houses lined canals with tall narrow fronts. Defensive walls surrounded growing towns. Even from far away, travelers could recognize certain cities by the color of their brickwork against cloudy skies. Some mornings, mist drifted between towers while wet brick streets reflected pale light from the dawn. Market workers opened wooden shutters. Bakers prepared ovens before sunrise. Horses pulled wagons through damp alleys still quiet from the night. And beneath nearly every step rested layers of handmade brick laid carefully by forgotten laborers. The construction sites themselves became worlds of constant movement and sound. Bricklayers worked methodically from wooden scaffolding balanced high above the streets. Mortar spread across each layer in careful lines while workers passed bricks upward through human chains. One brick. Then another. Then another. Always another. The rhythm continued hour after hour. The bricklayers developed remarkable precision through repetition. Their hands moved confidently without wasted effort. A quick glance judged spacing. A brief touch corrected alignment. Mortar squeezed softly between the joints as walls slowly climbed higher. Nearby, laborers mixed fresh mortar in large troughs using sand, lime, and water. Dust rose into the air during dry weather while rain transformed the ground into thick mud during storms. Construction seasons depended heavily on climate. Winter slowed the work in colder regions. Heavy rain interrupted mortar drying. Strong wind threatened scaffolding. And still the building continued year after year. Entire neighborhoods slowly transformed through brick construction. Older wooden homes were replaced after fires. Wealthier merchants invested in more durable buildings. Public ovens, warehouses, workshops, and schools expanded as populations grew. Some cities experienced terrible fires that reshaped their future completely. After devastating flames destroyed crowded wooden districts, many communities rebuilt using brick whenever possible. People learned painful lessons from fire. Brick resisted where timber vanished. Brick survived where ash remained. And so brickmakers found themselves more important than ever. Demand increased constantly. Kilns burned day and night during busy seasons. Clay pits expanded. Roads filled with transport carts carrying heavy loads toward the growing cities. The workers themselves often lived on the edges of these expanding urban worlds. Their neighborhoods smelled faintly of smoke and damp clay. Ash settled across roofs near kiln districts. Brick dust coated clothing and window sills. The labor shaped their bodies slowly across the years. Strong shoulders. Rough hands. Bent backs from lifting. Yet there was also pride in the work. Quiet pride. A brickmaker could walk through the city and recognize pieces of his labor everywhere. A chimney there. A school wall there. A bridge arch there. Even without wealth or fame, the worker understood something important: the city stood partly because of him. In some regions, decorative brickwork slowly became an art form of its own. Skilled builders arranged darker and lighter bricks into patterns across walls and towers. Arches curved gracefully above windows and doors. Complex chimneys rose like sculptures against the skyline. Yet beneath even the most beautiful structures remain the same humble beginning. Mud, water, fire, human patience. Inside the cities, brick changed everyday life in countless quiet ways. Brick cellars stayed cooler during summer heat. Brick ovens baked bread more evenly. Brick drainage channels carried waste away more safely than older systems. The material improved urban living slowly and steadily. People often stopped noticing it because it became so common. That is the strange fate of useful things. The more essential they become, the less people think about them. But brick quietly shaped entire civilizations. During winter evenings, the cities glowed softly from firelight reflecting against brick walls. Chimneys released thin smoke into cold air while families gathered inside warm rooms protected from wind and rain. Outside, footsteps echoed differently against brick streets after dark. Rainwater glistened on walls beneath lantern light. The smell of damp earth rose gently after storms. And beneath all of it rested centuries of labor layered quietly together. Some city brickmakers eventually specialized in particular tasks. Certain workers became known for kiln mastery. Others focused on mold making or decorative shaping. Skilled bricklayers earned reputations for especially strong or elegant walls. Apprentices learned slowly beneath experienced craftsmen. Young workers carried materials, cleaned tools, mixed mortar, and observed carefully before earning more responsibility. The learning process itself could last years. Mistakes mattered. A poorly fired brick weakened walls. A badly built chimney created danger. A weak arch might collapse under weight. So the older craftsmen watched closely while teaching patience above all else. Do not hurry. Measure carefully. Watch the weather. Trust the process. The advice remained remarkably similar across centuries and cultures. As trade expanded further, some cities developed enormous brick industries supporting thousands of workers. Entire districts focused on clay extraction, firing, transport, and construction. Smoke from the kilns darkened parts of the sky. Canals filled with barges carrying brick cargo. Roads echoed with wagon wheels from dawn until evening. The cities consumed bricks endlessly. Yet no matter how large the operations became, the basic reality remained ancient and deeply human. A person still stood beside wet earth. A person still shaped clay with their hands. A person still watched the fires through the night. And somewhere beyond the crowded city streets, beside quiet rivers and muddy pits, more workers prepared another batch of bricks while dawn slowly spread across the fields once again. There was a certain kind of silence that only existed near brick kilns at night. Not complete silence. Never complete. The fires always breathed softly through the darkness. Wood cracked and settled. Ash drifted upward. Warm air moved gently from the kiln openings into the cold night beyond. But compared to the noise and labor of daytime, the nights beside the kilns felt slower. More thoughtful. Almost dreamlike. For countless brickmakers throughout history, some of life's longest hours were spent beside those glowing fires under the stars. The daytime work demanded strength. The nighttime work demanded patience. A kiln could never simply be abandoned once the firing began. Heat needed constant attention. Fuel had to be added steadily. Airflow required careful balance. Too much fire ruined the bricks. Too little fire weakened them. So through long evenings and deep hours before dawn, workers remained awake beside the glow. The kiln sites looked beautiful in a quiet and exhausted sort of way after sunset. The world beyond often disappeared into darkness while the kiln itself became the center of everything. Red-orange light flickered through lower openings. Smoke drifted upward into the black sky. Sparks rose briefly like tiny stars before vanishing into the night air. Around the kiln rested piles of fuel waiting to be fed into the fire. Cut wood. Bundles of reeds. Brush. Coal in later centuries. Whatever the region could provide. The workers moved carefully around the heat with slow practiced motions. Their faces glowed amber in the firelight while shadows shifted across the ground behind them. Some wrapped heavy cloth around their shoulders against cold wind. Others sat on overturned buckets, stones, or rough wooden stools during quieter moments between tending the flames. The smell around the kiln at night was unforgettable. Smoke. Ash. Hot clay. Burning wood. Sometimes damp earth after rain. And beneath all of it, the faint sharp scent of heated brick slowly transforming inside the fire. The older kiln masters often seemed deeply calm during these nights. Years of experience taught them to read the fire almost like a language. The color of the flames mattered. The movement of smoke mattered. Even the sound inside the kiln mattered. A skilled worker could sometimes detect problems simply by listening carefully. Perhaps the heat was uneven. Perhaps airflow had changed. Perhaps fuel needed adjustment. Younger workers watched these older craftsmen closely, especially during difficult firings. Knowledge passed quietly beside the firelight through observation more than explanation. A nod toward the smoke. A brief instruction. A silent gesture toward the vents. That was often enough. Some kiln masters rarely spoke much at all during active firing. The work required concentration. The workers themselves often drifted into thoughtful silence as the night deepened. Long hours beside fire naturally slowed conversation. Fatigue settled gently into the body. The surrounding darkness encouraged quiet reflection. Some nights, workers shared simple meals beside the kiln. Bread warmed near the heat. Thin soup cooked in blackened pots. Tea or watered wine passed slowly between tired hands. The meals tasted different outdoors at night. Simpler. Warmer. More comforting somehow. Especially after exhausting labor. The weather shaped these nights deeply. In winter, the heat from the kiln felt precious against freezing air. Workers stretched their hands toward the warmth while frost gathered across nearby ground. Breath drifted pale beneath moonlight. The contrast between the burning kiln and the cold darkness beyond made the fire feel almost alive. During summer, however, the heat could become overwhelming. Workers sweated heavily even after sunset while warm air shimmered near the openings. Smoke clung to clothing and skin. Ash settled across faces already tired from daytime labor. Yet even then, the kiln demanded steady attention. Always attention. Sometimes rain arrived unexpectedly during the night. Workers hurried to protect fuel piles and check vulnerable sections of the kiln. Wet weather changed airflow and temperature in dangerous ways. The fires responded differently to moisture. The bricks inside responded differently too. And so the workers adapted constantly. Watching the sky. Watching the smoke. Watching the fire. Some kiln sites rested far enough from towns that nighttime felt especially isolated. Beyond the glow of the flames stretched only dark fields, forests, rivers, or marshland. Owls called from distant trees. Wind moved through tall grass. Occasionally an animal crossed somewhere beyond the firelight unseen. The workers remained awake in their small circle of warmth while most of the world slept. There was something ancient about those nights. Something that barely changed across centuries. A worker from ancient Mesopotamia would likely recognize the atmosphere immediately if placed beside a medieval kiln many thousands of years later. The same glow. The same smoke. The same exhaustion. The same patient attention to fire. Human beings changed slowly in certain ways. And the kilnites revealed that clearly. During long firings, workers sometimes slept in short shifts while others maintained the fire. Blankets spread across the ground nearby. Some rested against walls or fuel piles for brief moments before waking again to continue. True sleep rarely came deeply during important firings. The kill remained too important. Too unpredictable. Even resting workers half listened for changes in sound or shouted warnings from others. The bricks inside represented days or weeks of labor already invested. Failure carried real consequences. Lost time. Lost income. Lost shelter materials for waiting communities. So the workers protected the firing carefully until the very end. As the night slowly passed, the stars turned overhead almost unnoticed. Smoke drifted upward endlessly into darkness. The workers' movements became slower from fatigue yet remained deliberate. Fuel added carefully. Vents adjusted. Heat observed. Again and again. Some workers quietly told stories during calmer hours to stay awake. Stories about difficult winters. Flooded clay pits. Collapsed kilns from years long past. Stories about workers who had once stood beside the same fires but were now gone. The younger laborers listened while sparks floated into the night sky. In many ways, the kiln became more than a workplace during those long hours. It became a gathering place for memory itself. Shared labor creates strong bonds between people. Especially difficult labor. And few forms of work demanded patience quite like tending a brick kiln through the night. Then eventually, after many hours or days depending on the size of the firing, a subtle change arrived. The kiln no longer needed stronger flames. The peak heat had passed. Fuel addition slowed. The workers began allowing the fire to settle gradually downward. This stage often brought enormous relief mixed with careful caution. The hardest part was ending. But the process still was not complete. The cooling remained dangerous if rushed. So the workers sealed vents partially and waited once more while the massive structure slowly released its stored heat. The nights afterward felt quieter. Less tense. The glow softened. Smoke thinned. Workers rested more deeply beside the cooling kiln while dawn approached over the horizon. And in those early morning moments, as pale light slowly spread across fields and rooftops, the exhausted workers sometimes sat silently watching the smoke drift upward into the waking sky. Their clothes smelled of fire. Their faces carried ash and fatigue. Their hands ached from labor. Yet somewhere inside the kiln, thousands of bricks had survived another firing. Thousands of pieces of earth transformed slowly through patience, heat, and human endurance. Soon those bricks would leave the yard and disappear into homes, walls, bridges, ovens, and chimneys far beyond the kiln itself. But for one quiet moment before sunrise, they simply rested there together inside the cooling darkness while the workers beside them watched another morning arrive. There are certain smells that follow human history quietly through the centuries. Fresh bread before sunrise. Smoke drifting from distant chimneys. Wet earth after rain. And among them all, there is also the smell of rain falling softly against old brick. It is a calm smell. Cool. Heavy. Familiar. For generations of people living in brick towns and cities, that scent became part of ordinary life without them even noticing it very much. Rain changed everything in places built from brick. The color of walls deepened. Dust settled into the ground. Roads darkened beneath shining water. And the entire city seemed to breathe differently for a little while. In old brick towns, mornings after rain often arrived quietly. Clouds still hung low above rooftops while narrow streets reflected pale gray light from the sky. Water dripped slowly from roof edges into puddles below. The brick walls looked richer after becoming wet. Darker reds, deep browns, muted orange tones softened beneath moisture. The surfaces carried small imperfections shaped by years of weather, tiny cracks, uneven textures, worn corners touched by countless seasons. And somehow the rain made all those imperfections more visible, more beautiful. People stepped carefully through the damp streets while beginning another day. Bakery fires glowed behind fogged windows. Shopkeepers swept water from stone doorways. Horse carts rolled slowly through mud and puddles. The sound of wheels against wet brick roads created a softer rhythm than dry weather. Less dust. Less sharpness. Everything seemed quieter after rain. Brickmakers themselves understood weather deeply because rain controlled so much of their work. A sudden storm could destroy drying bricks within hours. Too much moisture weakened unfired clay. Flooded pits delayed labor for days. Yet once bricks were properly fired and built into walls, they often endured rain with remarkable strength. This endurance changed human settlements slowly over time. Communities trusted brick. People slept more peacefully during storms inside strong brick homes. Public buildings lasted longer. Streets remained more stable during wet seasons. The material brought a quiet sense of permanence. Even when rain battered the rooftops through long dark nights. In many old cities, drainage systems built from brick carried water beneath the streets during storms. Rainwater disappeared slowly through channels and tunnels hidden below the busy roads above. Most people walking those streets rarely thought about the workers who shaped those drainage bricks years earlier. But their labor remained there quietly beneath every rainfall. Supporting the city. Protecting it. Allowing life to continue smoothly. The sound of rain against brick possessed its own character too. It differed from rain falling on wood or open earth. Brick absorbed and reflected sound gently. In narrow streets lined with tall brick walls, rain seemed to echo softly through the air. People lying awake at night heard water tapping steadily outside while chimneys released faint warmth into cold air. Inside brick homes, the atmosphere during storms often felt deeply comforting. Safe. Enclosed. Still. The thick walls softened wind noise and held warmth close during cold weather. Candles flickered quietly beside damp windows while families gathered indoors listening to the weather beyond the walls. Soup simmered slowly over brick hearths. Wet boots dried near fires. Children watched raindrops slide downward across glass or shutters. And all around them, the bricks silently carried the weight of the storm. For brickmakers, however, rain always brought mixed emotions. The same weather that comforted families inside finished homes threatened fresh work still drying in open yards. Workers spent centuries studying clouds carefully. The color of the sky mattered. The direction of wind mattered. The smell of approaching rain mattered. Experienced brickmakers sometimes sensed storms hours before they arrived. A shift in air pressure. Changes in bird behavior. Distant thunder beyond the hills. Then the workers hurried. Fresh bricks might be covered quickly with cloth, straw, or wooden boards. Drying rows checked carefully. Drainage trenches cleared around the yards. And then everyone waited. Rain always forced waiting. The storms themselves varied greatly across different lands. In some regions, gentle steady rain lasted for days beneath gray skies. In others, violent sudden storms crashed across the landscape with thunder and flooding water. Each climate shaped brickmaking differently. In dry desert regions, rain remained rare but dangerous when it came. Unfired mud brick walls could soften quickly beneath heavy storms. Villages repaired damage constantly after unusual weather. In colder northern regions, repeated cycles of rain and freezing temperatures slowly cracked weaker bricks apart over many winters. So brickmakers adapted. They changed clay mixtures, improved firing methods, adjusted wall thickness. Human beings always learn slowly from weather. The cities themselves gradually developed personalities shaped partly by their brick and climate together. A rainy canal city smelled different from a dry desert settlement. A northern brick town under winter drizzle felt different from a warm riverside village after summer storms. Yet all these places shared something similar, the quiet presence of brick beneath human life. During long rainy afternoons, some city streets became strangely peaceful. Foot traffic slowed. Market noise softened beneath the weather. Smoke drifted lazily from chimneys into low clouds while water flowed steadily through gutters and drains. Workers sheltered beneath arches and awnings waiting for storms to pass. Brick walls darkened around them. The air smelled cool and earthy. Some people drank warm tea beside windows while watching rainfall across the streets. Others repaired tools indoors or rested briefly from labor. The city paused slightly beneath the weather. And the bricks held steady through it all. Old brick buildings often carried visible marks left by countless storms over many generations. Water stains beneath windows. Worn mortar softened by time. Moss growing gently in shaded corners where moisture lingered. Far from making the buildings ugly, these marks often gave them quiet character. Proof of endurance. Proof of long existence. A perfectly untouched wall rarely feels truly old. But weathered brick carries memory openly across its surface. The rain participates in shaping architecture just as much as the workers do. Brickmakers themselves sometimes developed almost emotional relationships with weather after spending entire lives dependent upon it. Good drying weeks brought relief and satisfaction. Endless rain created frustration and worry. Still, no worker could control the sky. Only respond to it patiently. And patience remained the central lesson of brickmaking through every century. Wait for proper clay. Wait for drying. Wait for firing. Wait for cooling. Wait for storms to pass. Human beings learned humility beside the earth and weather. The rain reminded them constantly. As evening settled over old brick cities after storms, the streets often glowed softly beneath lantern light reflected across wet surfaces. Footsteps echoed gently through damp alleys while the smell of rain lingered in the cooling air. Smoke rose from chimneys. Water dripped steadily from roof edges. And somewhere beyond the city, in muddy yards resting beneath gray skies, brickmakers walked carefully between covered rows of drying clay waiting for the weather to clear once more. Because tomorrow, if the sun returned, the work would begin again. Quietly. Patiently. One brick after another beneath the endless changing sky. Winter changed the rhythm of brickmaking more than any other season. The warm muddy yards of summer disappeared beneath frost. The clay hardened. The air sharpened. And across many parts of the world, the work slowed into a quieter and more difficult form. For brickmakers living in colder regions, winter demanded patience of a different kind. Not the patience of drying clay beneath hot sunlight, but the patience of waiting through cold skies, frozen ground, and long gray mornings when even simple labor felt heavier than before. In small villages and growing towns alike, winter often arrived gradually. At first the mornings only felt colder. Workers noticed frost resting across fields before sunrise. Breath drifted pale into the air while footsteps cracked softly over frozen grass. Then came the colder rains. Then wind. Then finally snow in some lands. And the brickyards changed completely. The mixing pits froze at the edges overnight. Water barrels formed thin sheets of ice. Mud hardened into rough uneven ground difficult to walk across. Fresh brick production became dangerous or impossible during the harshest periods because wet clay expanded and cracked when frozen. Drying slowed almost to nothing beneath weak winter sunlight. So many brickmakers adjusted their lives with the season. Some reduced production dramatically. Others stopped shaping entirely for part of the winter months. Yet the work never vanished completely. There were always repairs to make, kilns to maintain, tools to prepare, clay to gather and protect for future seasons. And so winter brought quieter forms of labor instead of rest. The mornings during these months often felt especially still. Smoke rose straight upward from chimneys into pale skies while villages remained calm beneath cold air. Snow softened sounds along roads and rooftops. Brickmakers wrapped themselves heavily before stepping outside. Thick coats, wool scarves, heavy boots damp from snow and mud. Their hands stiffened quickly in freezing weather even before work began. The clay pits looked different in winter too. Silent. Frozen. Water pooled beneath thin ice along the lower sections while the exposed earth turned dark and heavy beneath frost. Digging became difficult. Iron tools struck hardened ground with dull sounds. Workers breathed heavily while lifting frozen earth into carts. Some days the cold air cut sharply across the open pits while wind carried loose snow through the excavation areas. Still the workers continued slowly, carefully pacing themselves to conserve strength. In regions where winters remained extremely severe, brickmakers often prepared large clay reserves during warmer seasons. Huge covered piles rested beneath straw, cloth, or wooden shelters waiting for use when fresh digging became too difficult. Protecting the clay mattered enormously. Frozen unusable material meant delays once spring returned. And spring always returned eventually. That certainty carried workers through the cold months. Inside workshops and storage sheds, winter labor became quieter and more focused on preparation. Wooden molds were repaired beside small fires. Iron tools sharpened slowly against grinding stones. Broken wheel parts from carts were replaced before the roads thawed again. The sounds inside these spaces felt calm and intimate. Fire crackling softly. Tools scraping against wood. Wind moving faintly outside the walls. Some workers appreciated these slower winter days despite the hardship. Summer production seasons could become exhausting beyond measure. Endless shaping. Endless hauling. Endless firing beneath intense heat. Winter forced stillness. Forced reflection. Forced the body to move more slowly. Families gathered closer together during these months too. Evenings stretched long beneath early darkness while snow or cold rain settled outside. Inside brick homes, warmth collected around fireplaces built from the same materials the workers spent their lives shaping. The thick walls protected against winter wind remarkably well. That quiet comfort mattered deeply. Workers returned from frozen yards with numb hands and aching backs. Boots dried beside hearths while soup simmered slowly over glowing coals. The smell inside these homes often mixed smoke, wet wool, bread, and faint traces of clay dust carried home on clothing. Children listened to winter storms outside while older relatives spoke quietly about earlier seasons. Harsh winters from years long past. Floods that ruined spring clay. Kill fires that burned through snowstorms. The stories passed slowly through generations while candlelight flickered against brick walls. Winter also transformed the roads used for transporting bricks. Mud sometimes froze solid enough for easier travel during certain weeks. At other times melting snow created deep slippery conditions worse than autumn rain. Carts became difficult to control. Animals tired quickly. Ice gathered along river crossings and bridges. The journeys demanded caution. Yet some transport continued because towns still needed materials even during cold seasons. Builders repaired chimneys damaged by storms. Public ovens required maintenance. Walls weakened by moisture needed attention before spring rains returned. Human settlements never truly stopped needing care. The kilns themselves behaved differently in winter weather too. Cold air affected firing temperatures and airflow in complicated ways. Some workers preferred firing during crisp dry winter periods because the cool air created steadier conditions once the kiln reached proper heat. Others avoided large firings entirely during extreme cold for fear of cracking from sudden temperature changes. Every region developed its own traditions and methods over centuries of experience. And always, the workers learned directly from weather itself. The nights beside winter kilns possessed a special kind of beauty. Darkness arrived early. Snow reflected faint firelight across the ground. Smoke drifted upward into star-filled skies while workers warmed their hands near glowing openings. The contrast between freezing air and burning heat felt almost unreal. A worker might stand with one side of his body chilled by winter wind while the other side absorbed warmth from the kiln flames. The silence around those kilns often felt enormous. Snow muffled distant sounds from villages and roads. Only the fire continued speaking softly through the darkness. Some workers preferred these nights above all others. There was peace in them. A deep stillness. The world seemed simpler beside a winter kiln. Just darkness. Fire. Smoke. Patience. And the endless slow transformation of earth into brick. As winter deepened, entire towns changed appearance beneath snow and frost. Brick chimneys became especially important then. Nearly every home depended on fire for warmth and cooking. Thin trails of smoke curled upward from rooftops morning and evening while families stayed close indoors against the cold. Brick fireplaces glowed steadily. Brick ovens baked heavy winter bread. Brick walls trapped warmth through long nights. Once again, the material quietly supported ordinary human survival. Most people rarely thought about the workers who made those bricks years earlier. But their labor surrounded everyone constantly. Invisible. Essential. Enduring. Then slowly, almost unnoticed at first, winter began loosening its grip. Snow softened along the roadsides. Ice cracked across shallow ponds. The smell of damp earth returned faintly beneath the cold air. And the brickmakers watched carefully. Because spring meant movement. Spring meant clay softening once more beneath the thawing ground. Soon the pits would awaken again. Soon the mixing yards would fill with footsteps and mud. Soon fresh rows of drying bricks would stretch beneath warmer sunlight. The season of waiting would end. And beneath the pale sky of early spring, workers would once again place their hands into cold wet earth and begin the slow ancient work all over again. Long before railroads crossed countries. Long before engines carried heavy materials across highways. Bricks moved slowly across water. Rivers became the quiet roads of the ancient and medieval world. They carried grain, wood, cloth, stone, pottery, and countless other goods between villages and cities. And among those heavy cargoes, there were always bricks. Stacked carefully inside wooden boats. Covered against rain. Floating steadily beneath changing skies. For brickmakers living beside rivers, water shaped nearly every part of life. The clay often came from river banks themselves. The villages grew near fresh water. The kilns stood where transport remained possible. And once the bricks were fired and cooled, the river carried them outward into the world. There was something peaceful about the movement of brick by water. Slow. Steady. Quiet compared to rattling carts on rough roads. At dawn, river docks slowly awakened beneath mist and pale light. Workers stepped carefully across damp wooden platforms while ropes creaked softly against moored boats. Water touched the edges of the docks with gentle repetitive sounds. Nearby, stacks of bricks waited in neat rows beside the shore. Their surfaces still dusty from the kilns. Their colors glowing softly beneath the morning sky. Boatmen and laborers loaded them carefully one by one into the vessels. The weight had to be balanced properly. Too much cargo on one side created danger once the boat entered deeper water or stronger current. So the workers moved methodically. Slowly. Patiently. Exactly as brickmaking itself required. The boats varied greatly depending on the region and time period. Some were long narrow river barges pulled by animals walking along shore paths. Others drifted with the current beneath square cloth sails catching soft wind. Smaller boats carried cargo between nearby villages. Larger vessels transported thousands of bricks toward growing cities downstream. The sounds at the docks became deeply familiar to riverside communities. Water moving against wood. Men calling softly to one another. Ropes tightening. Boots scraping across wet planks. And beneath it all, the steady heavy sound of brick touching brick during loading. Children living near the rivers often watched the work with curiosity. They sat along grassy banks or wooden posts while the boats prepared for departure. To them, the sight felt ordinary. Boats arrived. Boats left. Cargo moved endlessly along the river. The movement became part of the rhythm of life itself. Many brickmakers understood the river almost as deeply as they understood clay. They watched water levels carefully throughout the year because seasonal changes affected transportation enormously. Flood season might allow larger boats to travel farther inland. Dry season exposed dangerous sandbanks and shallow crossings. Winter ice blocked northern waterways entirely in some lands. And storms could transform calm rivers into violent dangerous currents within hours. So timing mattered. Always timing. The river taught patience just as the clay did. During peaceful journeys, brick boats moved slowly through landscapes that changed little for centuries. Reeds swayed along muddy banks. Farmers worked nearby fields. Small villages appeared and disappeared beyond clusters of trees. Smoke rose from distant chimneys into pale skies. Birds crossed silently overhead. The boats drifted onward hour after hour. Some journeys lasted only part of a day. Others stretched across many days and nights. The workers aboard these vessels lived simple repetitive routines while traveling. Meals were cooked over small fires when the boat stopped near shore. Blankets spread across the deck beneath stars during calm weather. The cargo rested silently nearby. Heavy. Patient. Waiting for its future place inside walls and homes. Rain changed the journeys completely. River fog thickened during wet mornings. Water darkened the wooden decks while workers covered brick loads with cloth or straw as best they could. Storms forced boats toward shore where they waited beneath gray skies until conditions improved. Again and again, brickmaking returned to waiting for weather. Even transportation could not escape nature's pace. Along major rivers, entire communities grew wealthy through trade connected to brick and other building materials. Warehouses lined busy docks. Workers unloaded cargo from sunrise until darkness. Construction projects depended on steady deliveries arriving by water. Cities expanded partly because rivers allowed heavy materials to move more efficiently than rough roads alone. In some ancient river cities, barges carrying bricks arrived constantly during large building periods. Temple walls rose slowly beside the water. Public baths expanded. Markets widened. And behind every growing structure stood countless quiet river journeys most people soon forgot. Yet the workers remembered. The boatmen remembered cold mornings loading bricks beneath fog. The dock laborers remembered sore shoulders from endless lifting. The brickmakers remembered watching finished cargo disappear downstream toward distant places they might never see themselves. There was something strange about that. A worker could shape bricks with his own hands and never know where many of them finally rested. Perhaps they became part of a bakery oven in another town. Perhaps a school wall. Perhaps a chimney overlooking a river far away. The bricks traveled farther than the workers often did. Some river journeys passed through beautiful landscapes almost untouched by cities. Dense forests leaned over quiet water. Marsh birds stood motionless among reeds. Mist drifted low during sunrise while the boats moved silently forward. The world felt ancient in those moments. Older than kingdoms. Older than roads. Just water flowing endlessly toward the sea while humans drifted slowly upon it carrying pieces of earth shaped by fire. Night along the rivers possessed its own calm atmosphere. Boats tied themselves near shore while workers rested after long hours guiding cargo downstream. Small fires glowed beside the banks. Frogs and insects filled the darkness with soft sounds. The bricks rested nearby beneath moonlight and dew. Silent as always. A worker might lie awake briefly listening to water move against the hull while smoke drifted upward through tree branches overhead. Tomorrow the journey would continue. And after enough journeys, entire cities would rise from those floating cargoes. River transport also connected distant styles and techniques of brickmaking together. Ideas traveled alongside materials. Builders in one region learned from another. Kiln designs spread slowly through trade routes. Certain brick patterns became fashionable across wide areas. The rivers carried knowledge quietly between communities. Not quickly. Never quickly. But steadily. Human civilization itself often moved at the speed of rivers for long stretches of history. And bricks moved with it. As centuries passed, canals expanded transportation even further in some regions. Carefully dug waterways linked rivers together and reached growing industrial towns. Narrow canal boats carried astonishing amounts of brick slowly through the countryside. Towpaths beside the canals echoed with footsteps of horses pulling heavy cargoes beneath cloudy skies. The movement remained calm. Measured. Almost sleepy at times. Travelers standing beside old canals often watched the boats drift past with barely a sound except water and harness chains. And stacked inside those boats rested the same humble material humanity had shaped for thousands upon thousands of years. Clay. Water. Fire. Patience. Always patience. Then eventually, after long days floating beneath sun and rain and stars, the boats reached their destinations. The bricks were unloaded once more by tired hands onto busy docks and muddy shorelines. And somewhere nearby, builders waited to place them carefully into walls that might stand beside those same rivers for centuries to come. For most people throughout history, bricks were not symbols of greatness. They were symbols of warmth. Of shelter. Of ordinary evenings spent safely indoors while cold wind moved outside through darkness. A single brick might never become part of a palace or city wall. Instead, it might spend its entire existence surrounding a humble fire inside a small family home. And perhaps those quieter roles mattered most of all. Because while kings built monuments, ordinary people simply hoped for warmth during winter and dry shelter during rain. Brick helped provide both. As towns and villages slowly expanded through the centuries, brick hearths and chimneys became central features of daily life in many regions. They changed how homes felt. They changed how food was cooked. They even changed how families gathered together after sunset. Before proper chimneys became common, smoke from indoor fires often filled homes painfully. It drifted through rooms searching for openings in roofs or walls. Eyes burned. Air remained thick and unpleasant during cold seasons when fires burned constantly. But brick chimneys improved life slowly and quietly. Smoke rose upward more efficiently. Rooms stayed warmer. Walls became safer against fire. And families gathered more comfortably around steady hearths built from fired clay. The hearth itself often became the emotional center of the home. Not just for cooking. Not just for heat. But for human closeness. On cold evenings, family members naturally moved toward the warmth. Children rested near the fire after dark while parents prepared meals or repaired clothing beside flickering light. The brick glowed softly from stored heat. The room smelled of smoke, soup, bread, damp wool, and ash. Outside, rain or snow pressed against the world. Inside, the hearth offered calm protection. Many brickmakers understood this feeling deeply because their own homes often relied on the same materials they shaped all day. After exhausting labor in clay pits or beside kilns, workers returned to small houses where brick fireplaces warmed tired muscles through long nights. There was comfort in that quiet circle. The worker shaped the brick. The brick shaped the home. And the home sheltered the worker again. Over centuries, brick hearths became more carefully designed. Earlier fire spaces were often simple and rough. But slowly, builders improved airflow and heat retention through observation and experience. The walls around fireplaces thickened. Chimney openings changed shape. Smoke moved more smoothly upward. Every small improvement mattered to ordinary families living through harsh winters. In colder regions especially, a well-built brick fireplace could mean the difference between comfort and suffering during long seasons of snow and freezing wind. The fire would burn steadily inside brick chambers while the thick material absorbed warmth slowly and released it gradually through the room. Brick possessed a calm relationship with heat. It did not burn. It endured. The same quality that made it useful for kilns and ovens made it valuable inside homes too. In medieval towns and later cities, evenings often revealed this clearly. After sunset, rows of chimneys released smoke upward into dark skies while warm light flickered behind windows. Entire neighborhoods breathed through brick chimneys. Families cooked evening meals over brick hearths while outside streets grew colder and quieter. The sounds inside these homes felt soft and intimate. Fire crackling gently. Iron pots simmering. Low conversation. The occasional sound of wind against shutters. And always the quiet solid presence of brick surrounding the fire. The fireplaces themselves varied from region to region. Some were broad open hearths where entire families cooked together. Others were narrow efficient chambers designed mainly for warmth. In wealthier homes, decorative brickwork sometimes framed the hearth beautifully. Arches curved above the fire. Patterns formed across chimney surfaces. Skilled masons treated fireplaces almost like artwork. Yet even the simplest peasant cottages often depended on brick somewhere near the fire. Because fire and earth worked naturally together. Children growing up in brick homes carried certain memories through their lives forever. The warmth of sitting beside a hearth after returning from cold weather. The orange glow against dark walls during winter nights. The smell of smoke caught faintly in blankets and clothing. These small comforts shaped human emotional life more deeply than many grand historical events ever did. A warm room mattered. A safe fire mattered. And bricks quietly helped create both. Brick ovens inside homes changed food preparation too. Bread baked more evenly inside properly heated brick chambers. The thick walls stored heat long after flames disappeared. Families learned the rhythms of the oven carefully. When the bricks felt hot enough, how long heat would remain useful. When to place dough inside. The oven almost behaved like a living thing requiring understanding and patience. Women especially often developed remarkable skill with hearth and oven management because daily cooking depended upon it. They judged heat by touch, smell, and experience long before thermometers existed. The bricks taught them slowly over years of repetition. Too much fire burned the bread. Too little heat left it uncooked. The right balance created nourishment for entire households. Again, patience remained central. Always patience. Brick homes also carried sound differently from wooden structures. Wind softened against thick walls. Footsteps echoed more quietly. Rain tapped gently against chimneys during storms. These subtle differences changed the feeling of indoor life itself. People slept differently inside sturdy brick homes. They felt more protected, more enclosed against weather and darkness. In crowded growing cities, brick construction reduced the danger of devastating fires spreading endlessly between homes. Entire districts rebuilt after terrible fires often adopted more brick precisely because people longed for safety. One brick chimney protecting a roof from sparks could save an entire family. One brick wall resisting flame could stop destruction from spreading further down a narrow street. The material quietly protected human life again and again without demanding much attention for it. And still, most people rarely thought about the brickmakers themselves. The workers remained invisible behind the comfort they created. Invisible, yet essential. As centuries passed, the appearance of brick hearths slowly changed with new architectural styles and technologies. Some fireplaces became taller and narrower. Others more decorative. Iron stoves eventually appeared in many regions, reducing reliance on enormous open hearths. But even then, brick remained important. Stoves often rested inside brick alcoves. Chimneys still rose above rooftops. Ovens still depended on fired clay walls. The old relationship between fire and brick endured. In quiet villages during winter evenings, entire streets once glowed softly from hearth fires hidden behind brick walls. Smoke drifted upward beneath moonlight while snow covered roads and fences. Inside the homes, families gathered close around warmth created partly by earth shaped long ago beside muddy pits and glowing kilns. Perhaps that is one reason old brick homes still feel comforting today. They hold the memory of countless evenings inside their walls. Countless fires. Countless meals. Countless tired workers resting at last after long days of labor. The bricks absorbed all those moments quietly through the years. And somewhere beyond the sleeping villages, beside cooling kilns under the stars, more workers prepared another batch of bricks that would someday warm another family through another winter night. And so, after thousands of years, the story of brickmaking never truly ended. It simply continued quietly beneath human life. Empires rose and disappeared. Kings were crowned and forgotten. Languages changed. Roads shifted. Borders moved. But somewhere, in nearly every age, someone still walked slowly toward wet earth before sunrise carrying simple tools in tired hands. Someone still bent beside clay. Still watched the weather. Still waited patiently for drying winds and steady fires. The work remained ancient because the earth itself remained ancient. Brickmaking never depended upon mystery or grand invention. Only patience, water, mud, fire, and human endurance. For countless generations, people shaped the land beneath their feet into shelter for one another. The process was slow enough that entire lives passed quietly inside it. A child might first carry water to a brickyard beside a parent. Years later, that same child might shape bricks alone beneath summer heat. And many years after that, old age might arrive while watching younger hands continue the same work beneath the same sky. The rhythm outlived individuals, outlived families, sometimes even outlived cities. Old abandoned brickyards slowly returned to grass and silence after generations of labor. Clay pits filled gently with rainwater. Kilns collapsed into weathered ruins surrounded by weeds and wildflowers. Birds nested where fires once burned. Wind moved through broken walls. The earth reclaimed what humans had borrowed from it. And yet the bricks themselves often remained. Scattered beneath fields. Buried beneath streets. Hidden inside old walls still standing after centuries of rain and snow. Some bricks survived longer than the names of the workers who shaped them. Longer than the towns where they were fired. Longer even than the languages once spoken around the kilns. That quiet endurance feels almost comforting somehow. A reminder that ordinary labor can leave traces lasting far beyond a single lifetime. Most brickmakers never imagined themselves making history. They simply worked because homes were needed. Ovens were needed. Chimneys were needed. Walls were needed before winter came again. Their lives were filled mostly with practical concerns. Weather, food, exhaustion, the condition of the clay, the behavior of the fire. Yet together, those ordinary workers slowly built the physical world where human life unfolded. Every brick city began with muddy hands beside a riverbank. Every warm hearth began with clay pressed into a mold. Every quiet alley, bridge, chimney, and courtyard rested upon patient labor repeated countless times across centuries. Perhaps that is why old brick places feel so deeply human even now. A weathered brick wall carries small imperfections impossible to hide completely. Slight color changes from uneven firing. Tiny cracks from shifting seasons. Corners worn smooth by generations of passing hands. Those imperfections feel alive. They remind us that human beings made these things slowly, carefully, by hand. And the process itself often unfolded beneath ordinary skies. Summer heat pressing over the yards. Rain threatening fresh rows of drying clay. Cold wind moving through winter kilns. Morning mist above quiet rivers. Nothing grand. Only life continuing one day after another. In the modern world, machines now shape enormous numbers of bricks far faster than ancient workers ever could. Conveyors move materials endlessly. Engines replace animal carts. Automated kilns burn with controlled precision. Yet even now, the old methods survive in certain places. There are still craftsmen who press clay by hand. Still villages where bricks dry beneath open sunlight. Still workers who judge earth by touch and weather by smell. And perhaps there always will be. Because something about brickmaking connects deeply to the oldest parts of human existence. The desire to create shelter. The desire to shape earth into safety. The desire to leave something solid behind against the passing years. As evening settles softly over the long history of brickmaking, it becomes easier to imagine all those forgotten workers together across time. Ancient laborers beside the Nile carrying wet clay through warm floodplains. Medieval kiln workers feeding fires beneath snowy skies. Village families stacking fresh bricks beneath golden afternoon sunlight. boatmen drifting quietly down misty rivers with heavy cargo resting below their feet. Generations upon generations linked by the same slow work. And above them all, the same patient sky. The same changing seasons. The same earth waiting silently beneath human hands. Now the fires in the kiln begin to cool. Smoke rises gently into the darkening air. The final bricks rest quietly together inside fading warmth while distant evening settles across fields and rooftops. Somewhere nearby, a family sleeps inside walls built long ago from river clay. A chimney releases one final thread of smoke into the night. Rain taps softly against old brick streets. And the earth beneath everything remains still and calm, holding the memory of every hand that ever shaped it. The workers are gone now. The fires are quieter. But the bricks remain. Steady. Patient. Silent beneath the endless passage of time.